the link. It's basically the same Teams meeting as we have today, but let me just pop into back into my calendar for you for a second. So this is tomorrow mornings. I know that's a bit of a shocking URL, and let me give you, actually, I apologize, that's tomorrow afternoon. And there's the morning one. So anybody that hasn't received the link back from us in that regard, you're more than welcome to use that link there. All right, so we are recording this one, but yeah, there'll be nothing, those links above. I mean, we'd certainly like you to book it from our DDLS page, because that information sort of feeds back to Microsoft. And just for everybody's information on this, this was a presentation that Microsoft were doing for some time, primarily to solutions providers. So companies that would come out and say, hey, we can help you with deciding on what equipment you might need, from big solutions to smaller solutions for maybe little workplace huddle areas. And then they can actually offer a co-managed contract where they can actually look after the devices in the Teams room. We'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. So it's just because there was a need for companies to perhaps, they'd hit a bit, the real purpose behind this is trying to find out why businesses have hit a hurdle or they've stopped of the next stage of their Teams room progression. So maybe companies haven't started it, or they've started it in a very small way. Work and pandemic and everything else has just got in everybody's plate. Maybe it's a network issue. Maybe there's just been an adoption issue. And so the idea of us offering it to a wider audience, or Microsoft asking us to offer it to a wider audience, is there'll be some stuff in here that might help you in progressing to that next stage. So we'll go through in a second what we are going to cover. So we'd certainly like, those of you that haven't booked for tomorrow's lesson to do so through the DDLS website, but the links there will work. But it does feed back to Microsoft on the attendance and, and how popular it is. Also, there'll be a little form at the end of today that I'll give you a link to that I'd certainly appreciate. It's a very short one. It's just really asking for some feedback as to how you found today, keeping in mind there's more, there's more information tomorrow. But that form goes straight back to Microsoft. It's not something that comes through to DDLS. And just on that, at the end of tomorrow afternoon, session 2, there is a link, and I'll provide it to everybody later on today, that you can go for a digital badge. The exam was this information, and the exam was written with those solution providers in mind. So Microsoft felt for companies that are going to go out and approach businesses and help them with the integration of Teams and supporting integration of Teams, they should go through some information, some formal official curriculum, and also get certified before they can start offering that service. So I suppose what I'm saying is the exam's pretty tough, but you can sit it as many times as you like until you pass it. There's no cost involved, but keep in mind that for some of you, if you haven't dealt with Teams rooms much, you're fairly new to it, I'm going to try to give you as much as I can today and tomorrow, but the exam is pretty tough. We have had people pass it, but yeah, it was written with a different audience in mind, but it's certainly worthwhile having a go for it. So my name's Cal. We won't go through introductions. There's too many of us to do that. I will do my best to keep my eye on the chat, so I will promise to try to answer that, but again, just depends on where I'm at with the information and how many questions I sort of get hit with at once. And also there'll be a lot of in-depth stuff coming tomorrow. So, worst case scenario, I'll just say, hey, listen, it's this, but tomorrow we'll probably go into a bit more detail. All right, so let's get into that. Let's have a look. This is part 1. So you can ignore the times on this slide for the moment. That's not exactly how we're going to run it, because we did decide to split it into 2 parts, just for everyone's convenience. So you can ignore those times. However, we will be doing modules 1 through to 4 today with a break, probably in about an hour and a half time. So from whatever your local time is, an hour and a half from 3:30, I think that's a suitable time. If it's a little bit earlier, a little bit later, as soon as we finish module 2, I'll say, hey, let's go and have a coffee. and stretch your legs. But we'll go through the introduction of Teams and what we mean by shared devices. So while we're not excluding people's headsets and PCs with little cameras on the top of them or laptops with everything built into it, we're primarily talking about Teams rooms for Android, Teams rooms for Windows, as well as a little bit on Surface Hub. Not a lot of information on Surface Hub, just roughly the differences. Tomorrow we'll go into co-join or automatic join, where you can start a meeting from the Teams room console. And if you have access to a Surface Hub, it'll automatically join into the meeting, which is a lot easier for users. They don't have to sort of manually do that. A little bit on the licensing. Now that has recently changed, I think for the better, but I will expand more on the Pro license in what you get with that tomorrow in the last sort of lesson. So I'll give you a couple of things when we get to that today. But yeah, it's mainly gives you the opportunity perhaps to get access to another portal and maybe buy into like a co-managed arrangement with a partner that can help you, and I'll expand on that a little bit more tomorrow. Then we go into network readiness. Without doubt, that's been one of the most popular modules. There's a lot of businesses that have just found that the hurdles that they've got is their network environment. So we'll go through common things that can impact the performance and the quality of the Teams meetings, from proxy service firewall settings, and we'll also investigate how the media flows. So when it leaves a client instigating a meeting or joining a meeting, where does that traffic go from Microsoft and then back to the other participants? And that can change depending on the type of meeting that we're running, if it's an all-in meeting or it's a one-to-one meeting, whether you've got firewall rules in place. But we'll also start introducing things like transport relays and Azure front doors, which is a fancy way of saying the faster we can get to Microsoft's network, then we can reap the benefits of their high-speed backbone network. Now, from my understanding, in Australia, you're almost talking about zero latency. So once you get to the Microsoft front door, getting access to a service and back to that front door is almost zero latency. Now that might be an exaggeration, but that's what I've been told, and it's pretty phenomenal. So anything we can do, and we'll talk about peering. So some of the things you'll be able to control, some of it might just boil down to your bandwidth's just not up to it, but you might be surprised. I think I'm going to be able to touch on quite a few things you can manage yourselves, or at least go to your ISP and say, do you offer a peering service? So we'll go through that. That's been a very popular. So make sure I'll put the link back in here for the zip files. So any of you that have just joined us, they are PDFs of all the slides I'm bringing up. So when we get to module 2 and some of the other ones, there's some technical information in there that I'm sure you're going to want, even if it's just for passing on to other people back at work. We'll have a break. Then in module 3, we'll go through the different types of work environments, and I'll expand a little bit more on that shortly. So I'm sort of conscious of the time. I waffled on a little bit in module 1 this morning, but the workplace is going to change. So what I'd like you to all sort of think as we're going through the material today, you're probably visualizing your classic conference room or meeting room or / training room, where you've got the table, maybe it's a long rectangle with seats either side, where it was built mainly for face-to-face meetings, and it's been expanded over the journey where we might have customers or other parts of the business might dial in, for want of another phrase, to hook into the meeting. But we think it's going to expand to, hey, there might be some more collaboration areas. You might have huddles, is the term that we use, where employees might go over to an area and might want to gain access to some of the smaller solutions that Teams Rooms offers, and I'll expand a little bit more on that. So things to consider: the rooms that you're using, the purpose behind the rooms. Can you drill into the wall? Can it hold the multiple monitors? Are you in a building that might have heritage listing and you don't have any plenum space, or in the ceiling you can't? Maybe you can't, or you have to run conduit down the wall because they don't want you hacking away at things to hide all the cabling. So, and it also starts looking at the different types of devices, ones that suit smaller areas like those work huddles, right through to the large conferencing rooms, and the different vendors. And it's quite flexible, different price ranges for different things available to everybody. So we'll go through that, and in there it will differentiate between Teams Rooms on Android, Teams Rooms running on Windows, and the peripherals such as content, cameras, intelligent. speakers, those types of things that you may or may not have heard of before. Also, a lot of the stuff that I'll mention to you, and there's a little bit more in Module 8 tomorrow, we are assuming that, well, if you want those features, it has to be a Teams native experience, meaning that some parts of our business are using Cisco with WebEx or Zoom. We can hook into it. You can be using Teams rooms and that can hook into a Zoom meeting, etc. But some of the functionality that we're talking about, it's got to be Teams native, right? And as an aside, I do a lot of training on security and governance in Microsoft 365. They're the sort of things that you might not be getting with the other vendors. Now, I don't have shares in Microsoft. I wish I did. But, on top of the things that I'm going to sell to you today, and perhaps sell's a bad word, but highlight to you that you might not have been aware of. There's also the things that you can stop. For example, if I type a credit card number and we create a policy to not allow credit card numbers or more than 2 or more credit card numbers to be shared in an email or an attachment in an email, or sharing of a file in a chat message in a meeting, or typed it in the chat in the meeting, we can stop those things. We can nominate types of content, sensitive information, intellectual property, privacy information. We've got the capability of stopping that in the Microsoft world. Some of the other vendors don't concern themselves as much with that side of it. Now, sure, as people mention to me all the time, we've got policies with scripting that you can run. So certain individuals, you can say every meeting they run, we're going to record it just for compliance reasons. So you can always catch somebody saying something or writing something on a screen that's in a shared environment. You'll not stop somebody with their phone taking a photo of sensitive information and exchanging it that way. But I just wanted to mention that, yeah, you've got a lot of tools up your sleeve that we don't cover that in Teams, and that includes Teams rooms and sharing in SharePoint, sharing in OneDrive, writing in an email message. We can catch that sort of stuff. So, but a lot of the key stuff that I'll talk about and highlight, it's got to be a native environment. So Teams, through to Teams, not a third-party conglomerate, although it's supported, but some of the key features aren't. So that'll get a little bit mentioned in there. And we'll finish today with the resource account. So that's the account that you create that starts and logs on to the Teams room device. That's the one you assign the license to. So we'll go through how we create that, and then post-creation, what are some other options that we might want to do. And a little bit more on that in managing it tomorrow. And we'll talk about tomorrow's stuff, because you don't want to treat the device or the account that logs onto the device as a standard user. You don't want multi-factor authentication. You don't want group policies and stuff to apply to that account, and the device needs to be treated very, very differently, because you don't want it to come in at one stage and the thing can't log on because it's expecting a password change or multi-factor authentication. So what are we covering tomorrow? Module 5 goes through out-of-box experience. So, hey, we've got our license, we've purchased everything. We'll go through plugging it all in Module 3, but that'll go through what's my experience the first time we log on. There's some default passwords, and then you're going to change it and then re-log on, make sure that's all okay. And then post setup, we just want to run through a few things and make sure that the main things are functioning. And then we split Module 6 and 7 into 2 parts. So we're managing the Teams room and the Teams room app. And then the second part starts going through, well, how do we manage the operating systems? Because these Teams rooms devices have an operating system on them. We'll talk about the difference between Android and a Windows deployment. And then there's the Teams software on it. And it's very important that if you manually update those things, and you don't have to, get into that in a bit more detail tomorrow, that you update the Teams software first, the operating system second. The Teams software will block any operating system update that's not supported for Teams yet, even though it might be out there and people could install it on their PCs and etc. It's not quite ready for Teams room devices. But it is possible to do manual updates. Likewise with firmware, yeah, you can let it happen, or you can do it yourself if you want to. So as long as you're clear with that. But we can use the Teams admin center. There's XML files in the case of Teams rooms for Windows. You can affect it that way if you wanted to. Effectively, that's what the admin center sort of does, passes it out to the device, but you can mock one up, type one up and walk it over and manually copy it to the device if you need to. And also there's PowerShell commands if you allow remote PowerShell commands to be done on it. And then module 7 will go through, mainly the operating system updates. How do we manage that? We can use Intune. We can use other management options. So that Pro license there, the Teams Room Premium has now been renamed to Pro. That's where you might get one of your partners to assist you with supporting devices. You don't have to, but you'll be reaping a lot of benefits in doing so. And then we'll have a break, and then we finish with module 8. So that's really where we start going through some of the really cool new features like intelligent cameras, front row, registering your voice. So if you're in a meeting room and you speak, your name will appear above the text in the script as opposed to just room 1. So we'll go through some of those really cool features that maybe people aren't aware of that are only available in a native experience. We'll go through some troubleshooting, of course, as well. And then there's an opportunity to do the digital badge exam there. And unfortunately, we don't have drinks and appetizers, but yeah, this slide's been commandeered from some on-premises stuff that Microsoft obviously do. So that's let's get into module 1. Hope that touches base with you. So we're modules 1 through to 4 today, and 5 through to 8 plus the exam tomorrow, same time zone, same 10 o'clock or 3:30 Melbourne time. So when we talk about Microsoft Teams in hybrid meetings, certainly it's supported, but we mainly focus in this course on shared devices. So by that I mean Teams Rooms on Android, Teams Rooms for Windows, or Surface Hubs. Sure, you can join a meeting with your Jabra headsets or your laptop with everything built into it, but we're talking about specific devices with peripherals that we're going to have in a collaboration or a /meeting room area. Okay. And then overall, some broad requirements for Teams Rooms devices. Talk about Wi-Fi or wired network and those types of bits and pieces. So this is really just saying, and I won't read out the quote for you, you can all read, but things are changing, and by that I mean when we all were faced with the pandemic and people started working from home. I've been teaching Teams probably since 2018, something along those lines, and I saw a dramatic change to what it offered, particularly when March 2020 sort of kicked in, because what people were using Teams for, you might have remembered if you were using it back then, you could only have 4 people's video feed into a meeting. Well, now that's changed, of course. And companies that I were delivering training through to were probably saying, well, we're starting using Teams, but that's the channels, using it for text, hadn't started using it for making calls or running audio, video and desktop sharing meetings at that stage. It was something for down the track. And then of course the pandemic threw everybody into, hey, we just got to start using it. And then the training, I was running it nearly every second week. It was like Groundhog Day. Businesses just got confronted with it, and they just needed to get their head around it very, very quickly. And also Microsoft were making changes to it thick and fast because they want to maintain their relevancy. And if Zoom was doing this and Teams wasn't doing it, well, they were matching it, if not bettering it, very, very quickly. So it's it was an interesting time, but certainly it was the challenges now, I suppose, is I don't know if we were returning to the days where we're all going into the office for the vast majority of the time. That's certainly, there's a lot of talk. I know I'm in Melbourne. There's a lot of talk about this 4-day week, and businesses want you back in the office 3 days a week or 2 days a week or so many days a fortnight, and there's a little bit of flexibility as to which day. So our challenge now, and this is one of the focuses of where we're covering, is what we don't want to do is say, hey, we need to collaborate on something, but we can't do it tomorrow because Cal's not in the office on Thursdays. We're going to have to put it off to Fridays. Well, we can't do it Friday because Fred doesn't come in on a Friday. We don't want that. What we want to try to do is have this team's collaborative experience as best as we possibly can, get as close as we can to, like having people in the same location. But for that to really work well, the headsets with the built-in camera in your laptop, they've got us through, and they're great for sort of short-term things. But in a lengthy collaboration type environment, well, we can really do better. And that's where, some of these all-in-one Teams room devices comes into play. So the main thing is, if we are going to have people in different locations, whether they're home or another part of the business, and they are collaborating for extended periods of time and regularly, we want to make sure that those people are seen and heard, and and can hear and see everybody else. And I know a lot of the meetings that I attend for DDLS, it's pretty much people sitting in a conference room. You can see a sea of heads in that conference room, and there's normally somebody in management passing on information to all the staff, which is very important. But it's not always collaborative environment. It's not like I'm now presenting or somebody else is now presenting, or there's much interaction other than a couple of questions at the end of something. So we want to do better than that now that we've moved forward into this type of environment. So that's why I want you to start thinking about, it might not just be the meeting room that we've always had at work that was designed for face-to-face meetings, and we've now extended it a little bit to have conferencing type gear. We might start having little pockets of areas at work. Now, I know in our new location for DDLS in Melbourne, I don't actually have a desk. We just decided, well, we had desks for years in the old premises, and all we did was store stationery and some old manuals. And most of us don't even have manuals anymore. They're all digital. So it wasn't really a necessary thing, but a lot of businesses now have, hot swap desks, whatever term you want to use, and there might be little collaboration areas, for 5, maybe 10 people, or let's keep it at 5, where people just go and they might be working on a project, and a couple of us will be in the office, but we'll use a Teams room device and get access to other people and make it as good an experience as we can. And we'll start talking about things like front row and intelligent cameras and some of the peripherals that can make that work. So we sort of see that that's for a lot of people, and it depends what you are. If you're a frontline worker, that makes it a little bit different. Certainly in my case, we are still working mainly from home. I think next week I go into the office. I've got a 2-day course. Monday, Tuesday I'll be in, because there's 3 people that want to come on premises, but I think I've got another one Thursday, Friday, and those people are, connecting from home or from their office location. But there you go. That's just the new world. So I've probably covered some of these things here. So collaboration, ideation, that's a bit of a tough word, but the whole idea is we want more flexible work hours. Some companies now are saying, hey, we're quite happy for you to nominate a day you want to work from home. In fact, I've got a colleague in the health industry, works through one of the administration through one of the hospitals, and they're encouraging people to have some type of activity. And he takes Tuesday mornings. He works from home Tuesday, but he's given Tuesday morning off, and he plays walking football, walking soccer with some friends of mine, mainly retired people. And he just said, well, I didn't want to join a gym, and he didn't want to do this, that, and the other thing, which a lot of the people were taking advantage of. And they said, fine. So he just does his half day, he does that activity, and then he connects from home and finishes off from that. Might seem extreme, but who knows? And I think statistics were showing, I think I was, believe it or not, about a month ago, there was an interview. Melbourne were keen to get people back into the city to help the small businesses and the coffee shops and all the rest of it. And I think they said 7 out of 8 people interviewed said that they would only be back in the office at something like 2 days a week maximum, something along those lines. And then there's also statistics showing a lot of new people are looking for jobs now, whether there is that life's work balance. But we need, social connections and support. Some people, I know, when the pandemic first hit, we started a little team channel, so all the Melbourne office could just keep in touch with one another. Like yourselves, we didn't know what was happening. Training's a tough industry. It's normally the first thing companies stop spending on. It's generally the last thing they start spending on again. So we didn't know whether the whole place was going to go broke or people were going to do training anymore. As it turned out, a lot of people took opportunity to get trained, whether it was diplomas or whether they were coming through their IT training. They were just doing it remotely, and it wasn't that hard of a jump over for us. But yeah, there were some people that certainly really missed that social interaction. But we've still got the mix between the two. That's pretty much all. But obviously we want decent, reliable network, a bit more on that in module 2. And if it's going to happen long term, these spaces with a Teams room device would be better than everyone bringing in a laptop with a built-in camera. We can do it, but I've got some really good things to show you. And hot swap desks, we've mentioned that. The other thing too is perhaps just to jump a little bit ahead on front row is really a view. So we've got all together mode and gallery mode and those types of options when you're watching videos. Some of you may not know. I apologize for making that assumption. But front row, you can have everybody of equal size down the bottom of the screen when you're in a meeting. Now, there are some cameras now in a room, and it can support 5 to up to 9 people, depends. We'll go into a little bit more detail tomorrow, where if everybody's facing the camera can actually it can pick out your face and display it in that separate window down the bottom. And in not long from now, Microsoft will actually turn that into individual video feeds. At the moment, it's streamed as one video feed, but they'll take, it's like facial recognition, it'll just detect that that's a face. It'll remove the background. So I'll just be like a floating head down the bottom, and everyone will be exactly the same size. So somebody that's got a camera that's a long way away or zoomed in, everyone will have equal ranking. Now, that's not a political thing down the bottom. It's just everybody's going to be seen. And we can also register your voices. You can use the Teams client if you want to opt in for it. So I can say a few phrases and it digitally, and it's all protected at Microsoft. So if I'm in one of those meetings and I start speaking, then it'll have my name. So rather than saying room 1, and this is the text, the sound, the subscript coming from room 1, you'll actually see my name. So there's some really wonderful things. There's also stuff like when you people put their hands up, it'll be next to their face, rather than sort of you've got to look at a different view, or the emotions sort of just drift off the screen. They'll stay next to the person doing it. People put their hands up. You'll actually know the order that people put their hands up. So when you want to return to people, ask them a question, you can get to them in the order that they raised their hands. There's a few other bits and pieces coming with that. So again, coming back to your traditional meeting rooms where you've got everybody facing the center of the table, moving forward when we start maybe introducing new meeting rooms or new collaboration areas, that sort of classic design now that there's sort of encouraging from Microsoft is like a semicircular desk. It could be concave or convex with the screens in front of you, and then the camera can easily detect people's faces because they're all facing the camera. And that means those remote will see everybody down the bottom. Likewise, those in the meeting room will see everybody, separate video feeds down the bottom. So it's very, very cool. Native experience, though. Not going to get that with somebody's on Zoom but are joining into a Teams meeting, and etc. So these non-verbal clues and interactions, I'm now got the potential, rather than just see room 1 and there's like 5 or 6 people in there, I'm pretty sure I know who most of them are. But if they're talking, like micro conversations in that room, I can't really hear that or work out who's saying what to who. The other thing too is if I'm speaking and somebody's sort of scratching their head or got a bit of a puzzled look on their face, with this separate video feed of them now, I've got a better opportunity of detecting that than I would in the camera that's just pointing on the table and there's just some people there and I really can't discern raised eyebrows or anything. So this is what I mean, moving forward, we're trying to, don't just think your meeting room or your conference room, start thinking about the opportunity to expand into these little collaboration areas where people hot swap. Some people are in the office, some people are remoting in, but we can still collaborate all with this nice equal ranking. But anyway, you'll see a couple of examples that come up tomorrow. It's a little bit like this last picture on the right there. I'm sorry for looking over this way, but that's actually going to expand. So the background will be removed and you'll just see the floating head and shoulders, which is very cool. All faces will all be the same size. Very, very good. And if you've got multiple monitors, we can do some cool stuff with that too. So the speaker can get prominent above everybody else, and then the content gets a dedicated screen on the right. So in the past, here we were, these 3 people are working on something. Let's all go around, sit around somebody's desk. We've got the papers here if we need it. We're all looking at the one screen and off we go and we collaborate on a project or whatever it is that you're doing. Then, of course, pandemic hit and we were trying to do it with, in this case, the laptop with built-in cameras and maybe headsets, etc. And it got through us and it's fine. And as I said, there's nothing wrong with it moving forward. But, what we're trying to move towards is maybe more purpose-built areas or converting some of our traditional meeting areas into something that can collaborate. Here I've got somebody connecting on a regular basis from home, some people that want to be in the office or have chosen to be in the office on a particular day, and they're still all able to, as best as we can, work on that project as they might have done pre-pandemic. Depends on your business too. We've always got people in our company that are interstate, so we've been geared up. In fact, I'll be honest, our DDLS premises, all our audio video equipment was put in way before Teams was up and running. So a lot of it is Cisco and Tambu gear. And I look at some of the features that Teams Native brings to the table, and I think, oh God, that content cameras, which you'll talk about, and all that front row stuff would be fantastic for us to have. But yeah, we invested quite heavily in it. But the aim was back then there wasn't. Well, there was choice with vendors, but Teams didn't offer anything, and mainly what we were gearing it up for was people in the states where, let's say, Western Australia might have only had 2 people interested in the course, and we just couldn't fly an instructor over there, airfares and accommodation for 2 people for a 4 or 5 day course. So they would come into our DDLS premises, sit in a classroom, and they would be able to see me who was ever running the course, and the other students, and the screen I was demonstrating from the front, but they would be sitting in the classroom environment. So we were using our internal network, and for the most part, even though it was collaborative, there'd be one person doing most of the presenting from that regard. And we need to, that traditional thought process, we've got to move on from that, where we will have some people at home and some people at work on a continuing basis. So there's your personal device, so your headsets, PCs, laptops, mobile devices, phones. They can be old SIP phones too if you want. We're not really focusing on that today. We are focusing on these, what we call shared devices, Teams Room, whether it be Android, Windows, and Surface Hubs. Now Surface Hub is it is a collaborative tool, but you can run other apps. You can fire up a browser, you can launch the Teams client or bring up Word if you like, and I can draw on the screen. It's got a built-in camera and speakers, and it's portable. There's not a lot covered on the installation of them in this material and the stuff tomorrow, but we will talk about how, if you've got one, you certainly can use it, but if you move to a Teams Room device, we can have the Surface Hub automatically join, as opposed to, okay, I've got to make sure I invite the Surface Hub. Now I've got to walk over to the Surface Hub, start the Teams client software, join the meeting, and then then start running the meeting from the console from the Teams Room. We want it just to automatically jump in, if that's the option. And there's a trust scenario involved there. You tell the Surface Hub which devices you trust, and vice versa when it comes to auto join. So that's primarily what we focus on with Surface. A little bit of information in it, but not the out-of-box experience. We don't go through anything along those lines. So Teams Rooms devices, from the goal for them down the bottom, inclusive. So you heard me say before, we want to make sure that people are being seen and being heard, regardless of where they're attending from, and we want to move away from this sea of heads in a room, although sometimes that's unavoidable, of course. Easy to use. Those that have ran a meeting on their personal Teams client, if they got a Teams Room device put in front of them, now there's always exceptions to this, but I would feel they'd be fairly comfortable. Maybe scheduling a meeting and launching the meeting might be a bit problematic for some, but once they're in there, there's those familiar tools, so easy to use. And you could also say, some of the all-in-one devices, Neat is a company that produce Android-only solutions. Some of that you can be up and running in a very small, short time frame. It's a little bit like a smart TV. So with the remote control, you can put in the credentials and the password, make a few selections, and then off you go. If you move to the Teams Rooms for Windows, or your keyboard and mouse, you can integrate that and start typing things like that if you don't want to use still use the remote as well if you want to. Flexible phones can join. Got some really good stuff to talk about tomorrow with Bluetooth. If you wanted to, so you can auto join a meeting. I can be on my phone and just walk into a Teams room and go, bang, I want this room to automatically launch the Teams Rooms device and transfer the meeting into there, even people that are connected, or I can control some of the things from my mobile phone in a meeting. I don't have to be sitting in front of the console. Really useful stuff like that. But we'll talk about the security and all that stuff like that tomorrow. So that's certainly flexible. Flexible also, there's various support for different budgets, for different room sizes. There's Android, there's Windows, there's different manufacturers involved as well. And secure, it's all in the background handled by Microsoft. Roughly speaking, your data at rest, we're talking SharePoint, and SharePoint looks after files in Teams, Yammer, OneDrive, as well as SharePoint. It's your file server. Everything at rest is protected with BitLocker, and as long as an authenticated user of your business, it could be an invited guest, as long as they've authenticated and they've got at least read access to it, well, they can get access to it then, but it travels across the wire, across the network, in transport layer security or HTTPS, and you'll see when it comes to Teams, there's some ports and stuff that uses for that. So it's all secure from that regard. And end-to-end, if anybody cares from that. That was a bit of an interesting point at one point. Zoom didn't offer that. That was a lot of businesses that, no, we've got to use Teams. Zoom now does encryption from end to end, but not a lot of the other things I talked about this morning. There's a lot of stuff. You've got communication compliance. So if you've got groups of people at work, you just don't want to communicate with one another, you can, they just start typing somebody's name in a different segment is the term they use. That just, they can't do it. They can't send an email, they can't call, they can't invite them to a meeting, ask them to join into a meeting. So you got those stuff. You don't get that with the other vendors. Data loss prevention, that stops stuff that I was talking about before, like you don't want a credit card number to be shared, because in this thing, either in the email to box or in the chat message or in the share box in OneDrive, it's somebody external to the organization. You can allow people to override it and justify it if you wanted to. And then we've got sensitive information types or sensitivity labels. So if I put an attachment in this meeting and you all get access to it, you can download it. But if you try to give it to somebody else other than who I've shared it with, it's completely useless to them. All right. Now, as I said, somebody can write things down, read it out over the phone, take a photo of it with their camera and share it. So you'll always, now you've got other things. There's insider risk, communication compliance. It's a lot of stuff that we don't cover. I just want to mention that, you know, when you look at Teams native, you go, we've got to get Teams room stuff and get rid of maybe our other equipment. There's other benefits than perhaps just some of the selling points that I cover there. Yeah, just reading some of the questions there from Jay. Certainly Macs and iOSs and Androids can join meetings, but what we're talking about there is if you're going to buy Teams Room, and I'll talk about the Teams client that the staff run, device that's got a touchpad, the camera, the mic, the speakers all built in one. They come in two flavors, Android or Windows. Generally speaking, Android suits smaller environments, all-in-one style devices, very simple and easy to set up. Once you go for Teams Rooms for Windows, you can generally add more peripherals. So I need more speakers, I want more cameras, I want more monitors. The control of it, because it's Windows, Microsoft handles the operating system. If you go for Android, well, when the operating system updates is down to the OEM. So if it's a Logitech and Android device, it's up to them as to when they're going to update the OS and the underlying platform. Whereas with Windows, it's controlled by that, and you can have that automatically happen every night, around about 2:30 at night time. There's another question there. Teams advisor. So somebody was answering that. Yeah. So the Teams app works on everything, with some exceptions. We're talking about the Teams Room, so it's probably a picture of it on the next screen, that type of thing. All right. So Teams Rooms on Android. These tend to be all-in-one devices. You can add peripherals to them. I used to refer to these as collaboration bars. In the Teams admin center now, you will see Teams Room on Android. So Teams Room on Windows, Teams Room on Android. So the operating system is built into this device, and when it updates, it's up to audio codes as to when they do that. Yealink, Poly, Logitech, EOS, Audio Codes, Neat. Neat, I think, grew out of Tamberg or Cisco, some chaps that used to work for them, and they've come up with Android only at this stage. Neat's got some very cool stuff as a vendor. Now, anything that's supported by Microsoft, so they are certified by Microsoft. So all those vendors that I mentioned, doesn't mean you have to just buy, well, if we start with Android, we'll make everything Android, or we go for Yealink, we'll have to use Yealink for everything. That's not true at all. If they're all certified, they'll play well together. However, from a management perspective, you might say, well, we already have an arrangement, say, with HP, we might stick with that if you wanted to, or consistency means that your support staff, and I'll say IT, but that's an interesting point. If it's consistent, because the Windows out-of-box experience is the same, right? Doesn't matter what your vendor is. When it comes to Android, I can't say that, all right? They're not too complicated. Neat's really pretty easy. Logitech's not that bad, but yeah, like I explained this morning to everybody, if you've ever installed, I'm just actually 100% sure as to what country everybody's in here for the meeting, so I apologise for those of you that aren't not in Australia, but things like 9Now, iView, SBS, all those apps that you can watch free-to-air TV on their app because you missed it. If you've ever gone through that, you often get a code sent, you've got to type it in and then it syncs things. So there's a little bit of that, you might have to use the remote to type in names and passwords and make an option. Android's device might say, hey, you run Zoom or you run Teams, you've got to make that selection first. But yeah, I just sort of, from a consistency point of view, you might say, well, look, we like what we see with this vendor and we're probably going to, for the vast majority of it, stick with that. What I would say though is when you move to Teams rooms on Windows, at the moment, you can add more peripherals. But as I said, you don't have to lock yourself in. Well, we're going to use that vendor and we'll use on Windows, although you might find the management of it with some things, but that's expanding and changing quite a lot. So primary focus, yeah, everything's built into one in this case, except power, network, and a monitor. And there's the option of a console. Also, Android and Windows devices can have panels that you put outside a meeting room. So people can walk past and see, oh, that room's booked for the rest of today, and they can use that for scheduling a meeting too if they want to, without having to go into the room. The other thing too, now this is an Android only feature at the moment. Don't know whether it's going to come for the Windows, but there's a feature called Knock Knock. So if you're all in the meeting room and your time's run out and I booked this meeting and you're now chewing up my time, I can use the Knock Knock feature on the panel on the outside of the room, and that alerts everybody inside that, hey, your time's up, get out. So that's pretty cool. So there are some peripherals, but yeah, for a small type of environment, and this is perfect. It's pretty much got everything you want except a monitor. Let me go through, sorry, let me just change my screens. There we go. Then Teams rooms and Windows. And as this picture, it might be a little bit subtle there, but there's a couple of microphone pucks there, one at that end of the table, one at that end of the table. There might be multiple monitors at the front. You might want multiple cameras. And generally speaking, when you move towards a Windows solution, or not generally, when you move towards a Windows solution, there's also what we call a compute or a small form factor PC. And that generally has the option for plugging in more peripherals. And there's also some other types of extenders you can get, video device extenders and table extenders to plug more microphones, etc. into them. But from Windows perspective, if you go for a Windows perspective, the operating system is updated by Microsoft. So we say Windows 10, but there's a flavor of it for these types of devices. And they, if you want to, once it's up and running and you've configured it, you can leave it. Now, on first setup of it, it might take a day or two, but you'll find probably after that period of time, this thing will have updated to the latest version of Teams Room or the Teams client, as well as the appropriate latest version of Windows 10. You can manually control that. That's a little bit where tomorrow goes into. And then the firmware for the speakers and the cameras and all that sort of stuff is generally included into the Windows update. Android, it's up to the manufacturers to when they update their version of the operating system. Generally, they're like a version behind. So if a version of Android comes out, let's say it's version 12, you'll probably find then version 11 becomes available for Teams Rooms devices. Okay, you got to be very, very careful. If you ever force an update and it's not ready for Teams Rooms, you might have to go back to the manufacturer and say, have you got the original image for this? We have to re-image the device. It's extreme, but so as you know, all-in-one devices, small huddles, Android ready to go, Teams Rooms on Windows. We do get, you can start doing group policy and Intune and those types of stuff to help you if you want to. Not that I'm recommending it, but for today, without getting into that management side of things, if you want to add more peripherals, you're probably looking at a Teams Room on Windows as a solution. Now, Hub, as I said, there's not a great deal of information on it, but it is a collaboration device. There's an electronic whiteboard, it's got built-in speakers and cameras, but it's got the Windows icon there. I can click on it and fire up a browser, surf the internet, and show that to people. Where we're going to sort of focus on is that if we still have a Teams Room device and we've got one of these hubs in the room, we can have it auto join it, and then I can draw on it. I can use the whiteboard if I want to share an app or a website. I can still use it in that fashion. But when we go through auto join, it'll say, well, what's the preferred camera? And generally speaking, you'll be using the Teams Room because you might have multiple cameras, you might have multiple microphones. Chances are the drivers are more up to date. They're probably better quality than the built-in ones in here. And that's not trying to put it down. It's you've got more control over the placement of the camera, etc. But very, very handy and neat. Also have similar features for Android solutions too, which we'll talk about a little bit more tomorrow. Have I got anything else in here? Yeah, it's an all-in-one meeting and collaboration solution, but technically it's not a meetings room device or a Teams meeting room device, but it's got the Teams client and can be part of it. So there it is there, different sizes, depends on your budget and your need. Now, cameras, TVs you can buy 4K, no problem at all, but it'll only be distributed in 1080p. Now, I don't care if you're using Cisco or you're using Zoom, all the vendors are 1080p. 4K is supported, but it's not transmitted in 4K. So if you're using like a TV for something else, because the Olympic Games or the World Cup is on, no problem at all. But I think last I checked, could have this wrong, I think 4K is about 3 and a bit times what 1080p would be bandwidth wise. And if you're in a meeting where it's a video of people and maybe a PowerPoint slide or a screenshot, you get back more than 2 meters and you're probably not noticing that much of a difference. Maybe I'm slightly out there, but it's all about bandwidth. But yeah, it'll certainly allow greater resolution cameras, etc. But from a delivery at this point, you probably you're not going to see it from that point of view. And that's just another example there. Teams Rooms on Surface Hub. The idea is if I go into a Teams room and I fire up a meeting, what we don't want is to have to put the users through going over to the Surface Hub, starting the Teams software, remembering, I didn't invite the Surface Hub to the meeting, go back and add it as an invitee, now walk over and ask it to join the meeting and then start the meeting itself. We want people are going to be using these more and more and more, and we want it to just automatically pop in. The users don't even have to think. We don't want to waste that time. Put in a support call maybe for some people because somebody's booked this in an hour's time and I don't want to waste 15-20 minutes just getting the Surface Hub because I want to use it for its whiteboard capabilities, for argument's sake. And introduce it to spaces. Now, these sizes, they're not necessarily recommendations, but they're just sort of, you might start having little focus or meeting rooms or huddle spaces. That's a very common term now. And it's a bit subtle, but maybe moving forward, these areas I like this how, probably would have more of an elongated concave. Yeah, concave's the correct term, desk, where if I mount the camera underneath this TV or on above the top of it, I can get everybody's face front on because I know what's coming with some of those features. That doesn't mean you can't use it in here if that's not the case. But other considerations to start talking about, that's not a whiteboard. That's probably a bit of artwork or a baffle there to help with echoing in there. But do we have a physical whiteboard in room? Yeah, do we want to start using that in the meeting? So we're coming to those types of challenge. Then we move to slightly larger areas. So we've got more of a huddle space, and it might even be one of these casual ones where everyone can sit on bean bags and whatnot. But ideally everybody facing the camera as much as possible would be really good. And they're just starting to, the Android stuff's probably going to eat this up, as well as the Windows stuff. But when you start moving to these larger ones on the right, where we're possibly going to need more cameras, we're possibly going to need more microphones, we certainly want to have dual monitors here. If you think about the person sitting at the end of this table, here's the thing that we found out with some of our classrooms, the equipment that we had, I won't mention the vendor, it's not a Teams peripheral, it's maxed at a certain point. So I can't get a video feed like you can see of me here as an instructor in a classroom. It's further back, and you just pretty much see the backs of the head of the two people sitting in front of me. So you just need to be careful. And come back to a point that I made a little bit earlier. Sometimes this stuff, the decisions are put on. It could be building management, it could be the department manager, it could be the chief financial officer, because they're worried that everyone will go and spend a gazillion bucks and buy something that we really don't need. And I appreciate all those pressures. The other thing is that might get thrown at IT. Now, when you hire somebody for IT, or if you work in IT, you look after servers, you look after permissions, backup, restore, maybe databases, the websites, whatever it is that you do, the network. And now all of a sudden you're an audio video. You got that thrown at you as well, and that might not be your area of expertise. So some of the equipment we used when we moved offices, it was fine for what it was, and when we moved into larger spaces, it wasn't ideal. So if you're purchasing new stuff, start thinking about maybe these more collaborative huddle type environments, placement of the desks. But if you're purchasing new equipment, again, can this camera clearly pick up this person? Or if somebody decides they're going to slide their chair back, and some people do it on purpose, don't they, in meetings, we want to know the field of vision, how far we can zoom in. Also, by moving to two monitors here, these people up at this end of the table, they've got a better chance of seeing the content, as opposed to one monitor here. If you started putting just a single monitor and it's trying to show comments, the person speaking, and the content, gets really, really hard. So, these larger areas, we're starting to look at a Windows solution because we want to put more cameras and more speakers and that type of things. And we've got content cameras coming up as well. So here's just a bit of a summary for you, and I'll just finish the slide. So they're basically saying, hey, you might have an executive office. So they've got their desk and the credenza and whatever else they're allowed to have, but maybe over there's a couch with a coffee table, or maybe a round table with a few chairs, and quite a few meetings are held there. So maybe something like having a Teams room collaboration bar, or an Android or Windows type all-in-one solution there will work fine. Neat's also got, and I always forget the name of it, it will come to me soon. It's like a tablet, and you can actually sit it on a little tray. So you start the meeting perhaps from your desktop or your laptop, but then it fires up as the dedicated video console for the meeting, which is really handy. And I think they're about $1,400. The name of them will come to me in a second, but it's really cool. When I looked at that, I thought, when we were delivering training from home over the pandemic, that would have been really nice. Have something like that. As it's turned out, I went and bought a 32-inch Samsung, and at my old thing, just because I'm delivering online all the time. But something like that would be really, really cool. Right across to extra large meeting spaces or large conference rooms. There are solutions with, I was going to say A-Link, and where they can have environmental controls. So we'll dim the lights, shut the curtains, pull the projector screen down, start the meeting. You know, you can do all those types of things. And there's also ceiling tiles that can act as speakers and microphones to pick up a larger area, like more like an auditorium. Serious solutions, but if that's what you want to use it for. So there's just an overall, and then they start talking about, you know, what capacity. So an all-in-one device might handle these executive office areas to focus groups, maybe even a Surface Hub. As we start drifting across to these medium, extra large spaces where we're going to need a Windows solution because we want multiple speakers, we want multiple microphones, multiple cameras, etc. There you go. So it's a little bit hard to see, and zooming in probably isn't too helpful, but you can have like, oops, these are the types of stuff you can get. Sennheiser, you can get Shure, and they can have these tiles in the ceiling, and they are mics, and they can pick up a large area, and also the sound comes out of them, which is very, very impressive. But yeah, bigger solutions, and you wouldn't have them in every room, but there you go. So modular, all in, this means, hey, in a slightly larger room, I need multiple microphones there. This would be a Windows solution because it comes with a compute. So it's got the small form factor here, console, which can use power over Ethernet to connect to it, or you can run USB connection to it if you want to. So it's got multiple speakers there and a camera, a little bit more on the cameras and speakers coming up. Integrated, Android sits in here really, really nicely, but there are, Logitech's got an all-in-one. But if you don't want the small form factor, yeah, you don't even, you know, have a touch display. Arguably, you don't need the console, but it makes life a lot easier. So that's everything in one. Speaker, camera, follows me around, and microphone as well. But they're the ones that you need to test. We sneak that into a larger environment, is going to clearly pick up people speaking, you know, the other end of the meeting room. And then an all-in-one device. So this is where the Surface Hub comes in. So we're saying, no, we don't, well, we've got to buy a monitor over here, etc., and connect it to that. This has got it all in one, and they are portable. They're all technically portable. You can now buy units that you can wheel into a room, and it's got the monitors and the cameras underneath and batteries underneath too, if you even need that type of support. So you can stay involved in the meeting and move them if you wanted to. The requirements, physical requirements, the equipment you use, the monitors don't really need to be certified for Teams, but there's the CEC, consumer something or other. I can't remember what CEC stands for, but I don't know. Those of you who've got Foxtel remote, you turn the Foxtel remote on, the Foxtel box comes on, the TV comes on as well. And that would be desirable. If you've got existing TVs and you've got that in a meeting environment because it's handy to put the news on, or World Cup or the Olympic Games, it's always nice to have that on for staff, for argument's sake. You can use that, but it's great if it does support that. It's just another thing. If you purchasing that and doesn't support it, somebody starting the meeting's now going to have to know they've got to find the remote for it, or go up and turn that on and turn that off when they're finished. But other than that, yeah, make sure the vendor and the product you're using is certified for Teams. Firmware update. Well, if it's you know, if it's a Windows type solution, then it will probably be handled by the operating system. So when the Windows 10 updates for Teams Room, a lot of the firmware will come with that. However, you can log on as an administrator and launch a browser if you want to, or walk with a USB device, you know, drivers if you need to for cameras and microphones. You need wired, not wireless access. Technically speaking, Wi-Fi will work, but if there's any issues, Microsoft are pretty much going to say you've got to plug it into a wide network. Let's see if the problem goes away. So it's certainly desirable from a performance point of view. 1080p minimum, up to 2. Now, to have 2 displays, you need Windows Pro. Windows Basic only supports 1 monitor. Windows Pro, you need 2. HDMI connection, if one of them's touch capable, you want to draw on it or touch it to control meeting settings, etc., or anything that you're demonstrating, you'll need a second USB connection to the device. The USB keyboard and mouse, you only really need that when you're setting it up for the very first time. Once you've typed in your settings, you can unplug that and take it away with you. So anybody doing administrative work on the device, they just bring it into the room when they need it. Software requirements. Windows Teams Room devices need either Teams Room Basic or Premium, or Pro, I should say. And when you create the resource account, which we'll talk about in module 4, module 4, that's the license you assign to it, and it'll give them a mailbox in exchange. So although they say, it's just saying, hey, you have to have at minimum Exchange Online and Microsoft Teams licenses. Well, you need it for the staff. They probably got Microsoft 365. Teams comes with it, right? But for the device, you need Exchange Online. But if your company's already got Exchange Online, just buy a Teams Room license. Don't give a user license to a Team Rooms device. A lot of businesses do that by mistake. And I'm pretty sure, if not now, very, very soon, it just won't work anymore. Microsoft want you to use the Teams Room license, not a user's license, and some businesses have done that. If you've still got Skype for Business on-prem, well, there's certificates involved from a trust point of view, and some corporations and entities do use that. Network, you can configure Teams Room devices to have a static IP address, but the first time you fire it up, it needs to be DHCP capable and get access to DHCP, but you can change that later on. It'll start asking you questions about, what are you running on? Are you using Teams or you're running Zoom? And you choose that, then it's going to start. Some people register in the Teams Admin Center, so it'll give you a code, and then you've got to go to Teams Admin and enter it. All right. So there's things like that you need. You'll see that when we go through the out-of-box experience and some of that stuff tomorrow. The network needs to allow them to get access to the Microsoft and Office 365 URLs and IP addresses. So typically we'll be looking at 3478 and 443. They're your sort of minimum with Teams, but remember that Microsoft 365 has ports that people need access to as well, but they're your sort of main ones there. And the firewalls need to allow that through. Wide connection, as I said before, and bypassing the proxy is strongly recommended. Now, some businesses just flat out say we're not allowed to. Governance or compliance or our security team won't allow any internet traffic to bypass the proxy. Now, it's a bottleneck. So anytime you're starting to pump audio, video, desktop sharing, larger numbers of users, and probably 5 or 6 years ago, there's going to be potentially a performance hit there. All I want to say for now, and we'll do a little bit more about it tomorrow, is the Teams devices has a resource account. All that resource account can do is run Teams software. The resource account can't fire up a browser and surf the internet. Right? They can only run one app, so they're like a kiosk device. They can run one app at a time. At that point, all keyboard, somebody plugs the keyboard, Alt, Control, Delete, all that is disabled. All right. What you could do is, this is where we'll go tomorrow, is we'll say, well, why don't we can do conditional access to say this resource account can only log on in these locations. So you can put your corporate IP address ranges in there. It's only allowed to run Teams, Exchange, and SharePoint. So if anybody hacks and tries to log on as the resource account and they're using a browser to connect to our Microsoft 365, that's blocked. Any other operating system, it's blocked. So if you're using Android or you're using Teams Rooms for Windows, you can just say that resource account can only be on a Windows operating system and it can only run the following apps. So the device is locked down, and we can use conditional access to further lock it down if you wanted to. So maybe bypass the proxy, and that's going to give you a massive performance improvement. Now, Microsoft have told me if any of you are facing resistance for that back at work, they are more than happy that they can contact that person and sit down and go through some under the hood and all that type of stuff, just to perhaps try to assure them that it's might not be necessary at all, and they're going to get a massive performance benefit. But I understand that there's some, in some environments, you just have to. Resource account licensing. So when the device automatically starts and logs itself on, it's using the resource account, and you have to assign a license to it. Now it's now changed to Basic and Pro. You get 25 devices for free with Basic. You can only have one monitor, and you can still do administrative functions, but you miss out on some of the high-end admin controls. Once you go to your next license, so you're more than 25 devices, you're going to need a Pro license for every device after that. Having said that, you might like what Pro brings to the table and buy Pro license all the time. So you're not just going to wait till you get to 25 and then have to start paying for it. And I'll expand on that a little bit more tomorrow. Excuse me. I knew that was coming. Sorry. There's a lot of advantages to it. For today, right now, you get multiple displays. So if you want to have 2 monitors, you do need to have a Pro license. But we'll start talking about some of the other management. You get access to another admin console. You can also get access, if you wanted to, you can partner with a service provider, and they can do things such as, if another customer's got a problem with a drive or an issue, and they know you're also a customer of that driver, they can automatically have tried to correct that for you. Now, they can do as much as they can remotely. If they can't solve a problem, they'll give you very detailed directions with what you need to do to resolve an issue, so they can actually walk you through the process of fixing it. If they detect an issue with one of your devices and know it's going to affect other ones, if they can make that change, they'll make that change on the other ones. So it's some really cool stuff. So rather than you doing your sweep every day and seeing if anything's wrong, you'll already know that it was a problem, and chances are it may be fixed. Worst case scenario, you'll know before the employee walks into the office to use that Teams room device, but there's a problem. So we'll go through some examples of that. You need the Pro license for that. But there's a little bit of a summary. That's using the old terms there. It's mainly this managed operations and support. But you still get access to that environment, and you can do it yourself if you want to. But one of the, you're not necessarily taking advantage of people that are trained in audio, video, or have supported other customers and they've seen that problem before. And it came about, now just on that, Microsoft have reduced the basic license is now free, down from $15 per device. Pro licenses are $40, down from $50. So they've tried to make it attractive for people in considering the license. And while you still get some support from Microsoft, there's sort of where they were having problems in the past, I suppose, is people may have had a managed support environment with people that have done a rollout for them, and then maybe you report it to Microsoft or they report it to Microsoft, and then you get into this go-between, well, who's looking after what? So Microsoft still have like a service desk, but now what they're sort of encouraging is if you do align yourself with one of these partners, that's your one port of call. You don't have to find out what they're doing and go to Microsoft, find out what they're doing. They take control of it all that way. So network readiness. This is a popular module. So we'll go through things that classically get in the way of people getting good performance, good quality of calls. And we'll also go through how does the media travel if it's a one-on-one meeting as opposed to a one-to-many type arrangement, session initiation or the REST protocol, and then how the data travels, go through that. And we'll also start talking about transport relays and peering services. So some of these things you'll have control on. So already you might be able to go back to work and start talking about bypassing the web proxy for the Teams room stuff. We'll start looking at local DNS, local internet connections, and then maybe consulting with your ISP about a peering service. Those things might not cost a great deal for you to implement. Other than that, it may simply just be, well, capital expenditure doesn't allow us to increase bandwidth at the moment, but we will be looking at that next year. And, there's a couple of things that you might be able to do to remove some functionality from some staff and keep it as a priority for those that really need it for the interim. Not a great solution, but you can do that too. For example, you might say no desktop sharing for these people, but these people need it. It's not great. I mean, we're trying to encourage collaborative experience as best we can, but yeah, if it boils down, you've ticked every other box and it's just plain not enough bandwidth, nothing else for it than to pull out the checkbook. So we'll go through those types of things there. There's a couple of animated slides coming up. I'll probably get this out in full. So we're just sort of saying, what happens if it's a good experience for this caller? So they're able to join the meeting, no problem at all. The conversation isn't choppy, little bits cut here and there from it. So it's quite clear I'm following the conversation, what's being discussed. Everybody can see one another well, that's great. Presentation, that's keeping up with the audio, which is important as well, because you can certainly drift the conversation if what people are saying doesn't relate to the slide. And certainly we can focus and we're getting good productivity from there, as opposed to the bad experience along the bottom. What I would say is there's certainly times where you might have connectivity issues, and we can probably put up with it from time to time. And we'll look at some techniques that Microsoft's introduced to try to help in that regard. But if you start having really poor audio, you might as well kiss it goodbye. You could possibly put up with a little bit of crummy video or the presentation being a little bit lag, as long as it's not happening every time, all the time, of course. But once you've lost audio, it's a complete waste of time if you can't hear everything that's being said. Now, Microsoft split it into different ports, and they've got some techniques in place where what they can do is, if the video starts lagging, they'll reduce the quality of the video, and they might even, when it comes good, they'll try to fast forward to catch you up to where you were, but they'll try to maintain a quality audio in the background, so you're at least getting the what's being said by people. But there's a couple of acronyms coming up, and I don't claim to be an expert on all of them, but certainly the top row is what we would like to see as much as possible. Things that can affect, that you might be able to control. It's not always just about dollars. So is the room echoey, noisy, distracting sound around it? A lot of microphones now can be changed if they're Teams supported devices. You can isolate that it tries to cut out anything from about 1 meter diameter, or even closer. My mic I have is pretty good. Occasionally the lady who lives next door to me has her gardener in, and he's always using the blower vacuum at the most inopportune times. And while it annoys me, most of my students they can't even hear it, which is good. But things like carpet and glass, concrete floors, I know we've got one of our training rooms in Sydney, I think room 2, instructor desk is right near a window, and it just has a little bit of a, too much reverb, which can be a little bit annoying. So those things can certainly impact stuff. Quality of the capturing device, well, maybe the headset, the microphone you're using, the speakers that you have aren't that great, and the drivers, if you're plugging it into the operating system, so the person's device themselves, maybe it's legacy hardware, or it's really starting to get close to end of life. That could certainly, and they're running something else while they're in the meeting. They're also chewing up some bandwidth via some other process. And then we have the codecs. You might even find Teams can jump across them, where if it's experiencing bad audio, it might change codecs in some case to try to help. For the most part, Silk used to be what Skype used. They now use Saturn. Where it could have a bit of a challenge to is, are we talking about a pure native experience, or are we having, some people are using WebEx, some people using different equipment in the Teams? That could certainly have an issue there. Just reading Jason's comment there. Yeah. I find I always ask everybody, can you hear that noise? Actually, I was just about to mute the speakers. My wife's come home and the dogs started going bananas. But yeah, I can have somebody literally 5 meters away from me, probably a bit further, with a blower vacuum, and people say they can't hear. Mine's not that fancy a microphone, but it certainly works. But they're the things, that we probably put up with what we had in the pandemic, but now this is going to be the norm. I need to start thinking about those things. But the codecs, especially if you're, interoperability with third-party stuff, and then the network. Well, that's probably where we're focusing on in this scenario here, just stuff that we can do. So we might. How far are we off finishing? A little bit to go. And I'm just sort of finishing this slide. So, whoops. So echoey noise, quality of the device, and anything else that you're doing on the device, etc. Can all have an impact. Things that can cause drama, so packet loss resiliency. So there are some techniques. Microsoft's worked quite hard on this type of stuff. So if it detects packet loss on the network, and it will silently enable features in the background. There's one called forward error correction. You can see that acronym, to ensure that the receiving side can still reconstruct the original audio stream. So you'll find some of these techniques only work in Teams native. If you're integrating it with third party, what they call CVI, you'll find, you're probably not getting those techniques. So I've got, for audio, it may switch between audio codecs within a call to adapt towards changing network conditions. For video, it may lower image resolution and frame rates if it detects lower bandwidth on the network. And for screen sharing, it will use dynamic bandwidth and frame rates depending on what's going there. So there's all self-tuning things that are happening in the background. Again, some of this isn't supported with mixed environments. Now, you can even be involved in a meeting. Let's say you're using your mobile phone and data's starting to play up, but you've still got cellular network for audio for your phone calls, but data's starting to play up. Teams can prompt you and say, look, you're experiencing difficulty. Would you like us to call you back? And you can just switch over to cellular. In other words, it's going to throw you out the meeting, but rejoin you in the background. So you've just got audio until you come back into good connectivity from data. So at least you're getting the audio. So they've worked really hard. The Saturn protocol is now, more compressed, wideband audio, but running on low bandwidth. So they've, done quite a lot of work in that regard. Network overview. Now, you mightn't believe this, but Microsoft's fiber optic network goes to the moon and back 3 times. Did you all check out the moon last night? I was talking about it, then I completely forgot. Can't believe it. What an idiot. I was planning on going outside. Now, I won't read out all these statistics, but it's widely available. Why we're mentioning this is the faster that you can get to the Microsoft Azure front doors, is the term they use. The faster you can get to Microsoft, you're then reaping the rewards. Now, I've been led to believe that it's almost zero latency within the Microsoft network. Probably not everywhere, but for the most part. So the faster we can get there, the better off we will be. So they have these sort of Azure front doors. Think of them as mini data centers. They're not a full data center like Microsoft, but they've got more of them, and they offer to the public the services that people use and want the high speed. So they've got Exchange, they've got Teams, those types of things. So you connect to that, but when it wants your data, maybe you're presenting something from OneDrive, your PowerPoint slide, and SharePoint's getting involved at that point, it will take advantage of that backbone network. So the longer your corporate network, your WAN path, before you get to these closest Azure front doors, well, maybe we can look at that. There might be an expense involved, of course. UDP and TCP. A lot of web proxies will convert UDP to TCP. VPN, let me come back to that because that's going to have to chat about that a little bit. And then VPN connections. Nothing wrong with VPN connections, because what we're trying to do is a user's connecting to the corporate network from a remote location, home or otherwise. And in the old days, we would have done a dial-up modem. So a telco, if they were bored enough, might be able to have spied on that information. But you had STD calls and the bandwidth wasn't that great. So generally what we move to is you dial a local phone number to whoever your service provider was, and then you just use the internet as your backbone. So you weren't paying STD rates. Somebody in Sydney calling somebody connecting to a server in Melbourne or the office in Melbourne. So there's advantages because now you're on the internet, you're sharing it with every person and their dog and cat. So we've got to protect that. So we're encrypting and decrypting at the other end. And whenever you're doing that, you're putting more data and you're slowing down it, and it's affecting the performance or the quality of it. So it might be fine, but it could be causing impacts for the quality for some of you in that regard. Now, UDP and TCP, without going too mad, when we say IP, we generally talk about TCP/IP. It's a suite of protocols. TCP and UDP are part of that. TCP is what we call a connection-oriented protocol, which in simple terms means I'm going to connect to you. Are you available? Yeah, Cal, I'm available. Righto, how much can you handle at this particular time? Now, in the past, corporate networks, Novell was a big favoured service, and they used IPX SPX. I'm a lot older than probably all of you, but IPX SPX said for every packet there was an acknowledgement. A very sure, guaranteed way of delivery. I'm going to send you this bit. Did you get that? Yep. Here's the next bit. Did you get that? Yep. So if you're on an internal network and maybe a brain surgeon was working on my head, I would probably want IPX SPX because it's a very guaranteed way of delivering things. Once you start moving to the internet, well, for every outbound packet, there's going to be one coming back acknowledging that. That's just like doubling the cars on the freeway. We don't want to do that. So one of the techniques TCP/IP did is, okay, with TCP, it's a connection-oriented. Are you home? What can you currently handle? Now, there's different techniques for this. I'm just going to call them segments or packets. You might say, right, I'm not doing anything on the internet at the moment. You can send me 4 chunks or 4 segments at a time. Effectively, what I'm really doing is I'm trying to fill your network card's capabilities at this particular time. It's referred to as a window size, nothing to do with Microsoft Windows. So I'll send you segment 1, 2, 3, 4, and you acknowledge that and you say segment 5, which sort of tells me, you got the first 4 segments. Now I'll send you 5, 6, 7, 8. So we're still having acknowledgements, but we're not going mad, not for every packet. So if I sent you segments 1, 2, 3, 4, and you acknowledge back 4, that tells me, okay, you didn't get that last one. So A, I'll resend that to you. B, I'm going to halve your window size. I'm only going to send you 2 now. So I'll send you 4 again and 5. And I'll wait till you start becoming more reliable, if you like. Now, so the sender can automatically adapt. It's referred to as sliding windows. You could also be receiving the information and suddenly your PC is doing something else. And then you can start saying to me, actually, can you reduce the segments from 4 down to 2? And I'll go, yeah, no worries. So receiver and sender can automatically adapt. If I was sending you an email with an attachment that was an Excel spreadsheet, anything that gets lost, I'm either recreating it as I'm sending it to you. I'm assuming I'm a computer at that point in time. Or if something's wrong with what you've received, you can send an RQ, an automatic request for retransmission, and I can create it and send it to you. Now that's important because Excel can't open the spreadsheet if some of the data's missing. It'll be a corrupted file or whatever the case may be. So that's great. We like TCP, connection-oriented, acknowledgements, automatic request for retransmission, all that cool stuff. When it comes to audio, video, and desktop sharing, it's going to sound a little bit funny, but we're more interested in speed than we are in guaranteed delivery. Now, I know that does sound funny, but TCP, as cool as it is, there's a lot of faffing about with the data. That the headers that you have to add to it, and waiting for acknowledgement bits and all the rest of it, is as good as it is, it slows down. So UDP is classically used for either little things, like when you're getting an IP address, DHCP, that uses UDP. If you don't get an IP, we just send out another request, but who cares, right? Network can handle that. DNS is a tricky one that actually sits in both camps, but what we're getting at here is if a little bit of my voice gets chopped out, or a little bit of the video gets chopped out, we're sort of happy to put up with that rather than let's hold up the audio conversation and go back and ask for that little bit that got chopped out. Meanwhile, you're at the other end going, what? You know, the audio's just stopped because it's waiting for it to be retransmitted. We just move on. And we don't want that quality to be poor all the time. We don't want lots of packet loss, but we can put up with a little bit. So we're more, UDP is a simpler header. There's no connection. Are you there? Yeah, okay, I'm there. No, we're just going to send it to you. There's still the initiation process with Teams. So it's faster to create the data. And if we lose some, tough, we'll just move on. Again, we don't want to have it long term. So however, some web proxies go, oh, we're going to turn it all from UDP to TCP. And that's old school stuff. Helps in some regards, not so great for audio and video and media, whereas UDP is better. The other thing too is how do people get access to the internet? So the general load. A few years ago, you probably would have just Googled for a bit of research. Sure, your mail server was sending email and receiving email, but you would have just used it for looking up bits and pieces. Well, now everybody's, you know, on the internet all the time. The Teams client caches some things. Outlook caches your default folders and checks every 5 minutes, every 5 minutes for new mail, etc. But, you know, other things are, you know, SharePoint, the icons might cache. So more people are on the internet. You start throwing audio, video, desktop sharing and calls, voice calls into the mix. Yeah, and then you might just have busy periods of time. So traditionally, we've got our corporate network, full control over it, QoS, quality of service, things that you can control. I've got management of the WAN and we've got it in place, and maybe it's, you know, because we've got it, the fact that we utilize it more, there's not really any initial expense. And then we get connect to our ISP. All our QoS values, we lose a lot of the control there. So quality of services, let's call it a tagging technique. So all your routers and layer 3 switches can determine what gets priority and minimum bandwidth, etc. So, but I have to laugh. My little dogs come around the corner going, it's tea time. God, they're shockers, aren't they? But once it leaves your network, those QoS tags are completely ignored. Likewise, return traffic, there's no QoS there. You can take control of when it gets back to your network, sure. So yeah, there's only so much that you can affect the performance. So if you've got a problem here in the red, not a great deal you can do about it. You can certainly discuss some things with your service provider. I'm not sure what we mean by this is not happening, but however, full control. The thing is, higher cost per managed WAN connections. Well, if you've already got a WAN connection for other purposes like database replication or backups overnight, that's one thing. But now we're starting, you know, if you've got a branch office that their only form of internet access is to come across the WAN, and then from there it goes out to the internet, and then the return traffic comes back that way. WANs tend to have, you know, limited bandwidth. There's often overheads involved with it. And what we're sort of alluding towards is maybe it's a better option that we give those sites, and I'm talking office sites, not people's home sites, local internet access. We can do a great deal of improvement in the performance by giving them local access to the internet. Once we hit the internet, maybe we select an ISP that supports peering. We're coming into that. Get ourselves to the Microsoft network as fast as we can, those Azure front doors. This is where we'll move into a couple of things here that might help. So look, let me go back. So local internet breakouts, as I mentioned before, if we can try to eliminate coming across a WAN like a hub and spoke topology from a branch office to head office out to the internet, if we can eliminate that, that might help just through the delay and the overheads in getting that to work. The other thing that you can do is local DNS resolution. Now, this is a bit of a tricky one, but we're going to start talking about, you know, Azure front doors and transport relays are the techniques that Microsoft are responsible for to help you with things. Classically, what businesses have is they would have DNS. If you're not familiar with it, you type in acme.com.au and it'll come back with the IP address, and then your browser goes off and it finds the web page. So it's named IP address resolution predominantly. It's a real oversimplification of it, but so if you're looking for the Microsoft URLs, whatever.office.com, you know, for connecting to it, if Most businesses, your DNS server is your domain controller, the one that you log on to in the morning. Once you start wanting to resolve an external name to IP address, most businesses get their domain controllers to forward that request to another DNS server. That way, we're protecting our domain controllers from the internet, and that DNS server will then go out to the internet, or might go to your service provider and say, hey, what's the IP address for acme.com.au? And that's very, very normal. So the answer comes back, that DNS server in your demilitarized zone will cache that. It'll pass it to the domain control that's also running DNS, and it'll cache that, and then it'll relay back to the user, your PC, and your PC will cache it for various periods in time. Okay. Where some businesses, what they do is this forwarding server, the one that's connected to the internet, they might direct some people to a DNS server in a central location. And there's advantages for that, because if another user wants to find acme.com.au, if they're in another site, well, they might have to go through the whole process again. If they're in the same site, one of those DNS servers goes, oh, I got that for Cal an hour ago. Here's the IP address. So it cuts down on bandwidth, and also from a user perspective, it's very, very helpful. But if somebody in another site goes off, they're missing out on that caching option. So some businesses, their forwarding DNS server is in a head office, and the head office might be in another part of the globe. So when you're looking for Microsoft services, DNS will come back with an IP address, but what Microsoft sent back might be an Azure service closer to your head office, which is in Germany, and not the one in Australia. So having local DNS resolution can help. Now, it might not impact any of you, but if you work for a multinational company, they may have this DNS forwarding where it's going through to a central location thinking they're doing the right idea, but Microsoft's making a bad judgment call as to about where to redirect you back for that service. So there are things that you might be able to change that mightn't cost a lot or cost anything at all. Local internet access, yeah, I get that. That might be problematic there. Now we've got our service provider. Now there's a URL here. I will put it in there for you. I'll explain what peering is. Ooh, that always scares you, doesn't it? You don't have to go there now, by the way. Let me explain what peering is. So you can go to your ISP and say, hey, do you support peering services? There we go. So here's a classic scenario. There's the Teams client. You go to your company's edge router. So that's the one that sits on the actual internet or through an ISP, goes to the ISP. The ISP then, through whatever internal routing setup it has, it's choosing this path. So you can look at all the devices that it's hopping through to get to the Microsoft network, the Azure front door that we were talking about before. Maybe they've optimized that through techniques. That's pretty cool. But if they offer a peering service, and not all ISPs do, so that's what that URL is sort of designed to give you there. You can, just see if it's available, and it is available, but, ask your ISP if they offer the service. Now, tunneling is not the correct word to use. It's like a BGP technique for anybody that cares. So it's, even though there's other routers are involved, they're so faster, they're not faffing about with it along the way and looking up routing paths to determine where's the next location to go. It basically passes it through. So that's an optimum thing. So make sure that if you've got a service provider that supports peering, you're certainly going to get a massive advantage from there. There's a couple of animated videos coming up in a second on that. So here's this is your front door. So they are, as I said, mini data centers that offer, could be a SharePoint, Exchange Online, and Teams. This is your front door. So it's not a full data center from a Microsoft perspective, but there's more of them strategically placed. It's about 190, I think. Don't hold me to that, around the globe. And that's where that DNS will send you, and it may offer the service, but if it does need to get access to your tenant's data, and now it's going to use the internal Microsoft network. So whatever IP address DNS is returning to you, Microsoft will go, Germany, and you want it to be, Australia from that regard. Now, the transport relay that gets mentioned here does a couple of things. It can turn anything that's coming to it in TCP back into the UDP streams. There's 4 of them. There's one for setting up the "Are you there? Are you available? Can you receive a call?" There's one for audio, there's one for video, and there's one for desktop sharing. Now, from a firewall perspective, they have a single port to make life easy for you, but the transport relay could say, well, we'll actually break it down, because remember we're talking about audio can continue along if video is experiencing some problems. So that can help with that. So it breaks it up into the multiple UDP ports, and the return traffic, it might be the one that turns it back to TCP for you, because that's what you're expecting the traffic to come back. So it plays a very important role from Microsoft's perspective. So this is a centralized internet. So they're just sort of saying, hey, everybody connects to head office because that's the one that's got the internet access, and it goes out, gets the data, comes back to the internet point and passes it on to all the staff. However, maybe if we opted for local internet, and all these people go to their local internet source, right? So a bit closer than this single head office environment. So that's the grey squares there. And then they, from those locations, they'll piggyback into there. So faster performance from that point of view. I know the color coding, it's all blues and greys and purples, which makes it a bit tough. But we've got, you know, different egress points and ingress points there. So that'll certainly improve the performance there. Now, meeting locations, you might not be aware of this, but the first person who joins a meeting can determine where it's hosted from. So another thing that might pay, if you know that you have a meeting every Wednesday night and there's always that person that's in, you know, Manangatang, and they start at first. Now, I've got to say, probably in Australia, it probably makes no difference. However, if an employee in Perth did it, just let me think about that. There's no data centers there. Yeah, it could. Yeah, may not cause much drama, but if you've got people from multiple countries, that could be definitely an issue. So let's go through that and have a bit of a look at it here. So here we have the tenant is in the US. So in other words, the company that's created the tenancy with Microsoft, they're getting charged in US dollars, they pay US taxes, all your data is stored in the US. Even if you're an employee and you're in Australia, the data is stored in the US. That's how it works. Now, you can get geographically distributed services from Microsoft, but it's generally there for disaster recovery. So if something took out the data centers at Microsoft in the US, you've got a copy of it in Australia, for argument's sake. In Australia, we've got multiple data centers. So the Microsoft always have a copy of it in different data centers in the same country, but you can actually ask for, I want a copy of it in another country, just in case there's some, you know, terrible disaster that takes out a location. But so what's happening there when a meeting is hosted? This person was first to launch it, so they've gone to their closest peering point to the internet, and it's going across over to here where the service is. All the others connect to the meeting later on, and they are still going from where the meeting was launched. The closest peering point is to the person that started the meeting, and that determines whether the meeting is hosted from. If we have an example, it's the same company, so the tenant's still in the US, the data's stored in the US, but when it comes to Teams meetings, don't panic. What happens over here is they'll all start the meeting, and the meeting will be located over in Europe, even though now if somebody starts firing up PowerPoint that's in their OneDrive, that's coming from the US, but the meeting and communication is going to stay within these locations. So types of calls, direct calls, two people, one-on-one. Right, you might see 1:1 in a lot of literature, and then you've got meetings. Well, it's either more than 2 people, or it's a channel meeting, you know, in Teams. So many people in a meeting or a channel meeting. So it's important to keep that in mind. So this little, I'll complete this animated slide just to show it all to you. The green dotted line here on the left-hand side is applicable to all these scenarios. It doesn't change. So what we've got here is SIP used to be the old session initiation protocol, and we still have SIP phones and stuff like that. So Skype used SIP, and Silk was the codec. We now use REST and Saturn for Teams. All we need to be aware of is when person 1 is going to start a meeting with person 2, it goes off to the service at Microsoft, and the return instigation of the meeting comes back to that person. Once they connect and they're both joining the meeting, now it can vary a little bit. So it doesn't matter which one of these graphics we're looking at, the setting up of the meeting goes through the service at Microsoft. The blue is talking about, well, now the meeting started, how does the audio, video, and desktop sharing content, where does that travel? In the case of 3 or more people, so it's not a one-on-one, okay, the data always goes out to the service at Microsoft and back. If it was just 2 users at work, once the setup's gone out through to the service, the data is going to stay on the internal network, or on the internal network could be go for WAN links too. And then on the right, if there's anything blocking 2 people that work for the same company from directly communicating with one another, so maybe there's switching rules or routing rules that blocks direct traffic between their 2 networks, or they, if they're in physically different locations, then it'll go out to the service and come back that way, and the transport relay will probably get involved in those communications. So the instigation of the signaling of setting up of the connection always goes out through the service, but the data might stay, and primarily if it's one-on-one, only 2 people in the meeting, for a lot of businesses it will stay internal. As soon as you increase that, it's going to go back out through the service at that point. And that's interesting because there's some cool dashboards and some reports that you can see, well, why is that user reporting a problem? And it might be the user to the server, not the user to the user. Bandwidth controls. These are sort of recommended minimums. We also got the upload and the download speeds. So if you want a high definition video, 1080p screen, you're looking at maybe 2 megabits per second. Download is the recommended. Now, if your bandwidth can't handle this, you can go through policies in Teams admin and cap it in here, the media rate that you want. So what we'd be doing is maybe we're lowering it for some users, or putting a minimum that we would like for, I don't want to say more important users, but maybe your leadership team. So this is where what you might say is, well, we don't have the budget at the moment to just increase the bandwidth. We've done everything else we can do, and until we can purchase more bandwidth and we can budget for that next year, what we're going to do is maybe put this in for key people, and everybody else, you can even turn stuff off if you wanted to just give them audio in meetings, no desktop sharing, audio meeting. It's not ideal. Proxies and firewalls. All firewalls and proxies create a bottleneck, generally for a good reason. We want to check to see if the proxies can cache web stuff, but can also make sure that you're happy to allow it through. Firewalls obviously can do lots of things just to make sure that it's legitimate traffic coming back, and we can block certain ports. Is it established traffic inside will allow return traffic, but if it just starts outside, we won't allow that in, only if it's return traffic. So all sorts of things you can do. As I said before, it's preferable that you bypass your proxies. They are kiosk devices. They run Windows 10 IoT, Internet of Things. When they launch with the resource account, they can only run one piece of software. They can't fire up a browser and do anything else. Keyboard shortcuts are blocked at that point in time. So maybe if you're experiencing problems having the Teams room device bypass the proxy, it might just be all you need to do. There's no surfing the internet. Now, I have to say, if you go into admin mode on the device, you can launch a browser. What we'll look at tomorrow is you can go, well, what we'll do is we'll do conditional access and say that this resource account can only log on to the corporate network from a corporate location, and they can only run Exchange, SharePoint, and Teams. So only pieces of software, and it's got to be from Windows, or it's got to be from Android if you want. So if that account, somebody hacked that account name and password and try to connect to your environment from a browser, it's not going to be allowed. Conditional access will block it. So bypassing the proxy, knowing that the device is is fairly well secure. Plus, we might put conditional access things in place to restrict locations that resource account can log on, and the services that resource account can get access to will probably be enough, and tick that box. It can be a big solution to your problem. Anything else that's doing, packet inspection, we can bypass that for these devices. It just slows things down. Exactly, we talked about TCP and UDP before. Ports and URLs, you must make sure that, and this is just, there's other ports, other Microsoft ports that you need, but Microsoft Teams ports need to be allowed, and Microsoft updates. These devices can self-update their Teams client as well as their Windows operating system. If there's the URLs to get access to the store for the updates. If you're running Intune, there might be other ports that you need to allow through. You can manage these devices from the Teams admin center. If you want to, you can manage them one at a time, walking to them. You can use PowerShell, but if you want to use Intune for controlling settings and updating quality updates and feature updates, you can do that. You need to allow that, and you need a time server, especially if it's a standalone Teams room. As I said, it doesn't have to join as your Active Directory or Active Directory on premises. If it's a Windows Teams solution, the compute, the small form factor, can be a computer object in Active Directory on-prem, and therefore it gets time from the domain controllers. There's nobody wants to book Teams rooms and the time zone's out of whack. I'm not recommending it. If the computer on the Windows Teams device, you don't want to be getting default group policies on it. All sorts of weird things can go wrong with that device. Okay, so you got to be very, very careful that it's isolated from domain policies. It's in its own OU. However, if it's a standalone device, you go, yeah, you know what, we'll just register it in the Teams admin center, and we'll use that tool for managing it, and some other stuff we'll talk about tomorrow. Or you're going to have to configure it with a time server to make sure that it's updating its time. Now these URLs, there's I've actually might have a link of. I'll get them to you if anybody's interested. Useful URLs. There's some stuff on Quaz if you want to configure that. I will get that for you. We're going to go for a break at some point. I'll give you the URL for all the ports. Not that I expect anyone. Look, it's massive. I'm really just giving it to everybody, because some companies have they go, no, we want IP addresses. We don't put star.this and star.that in our firewall rules. And all I'm telling you, if that's the path you want to go down for, don't ring me. That's because they do change them on a fairly frequent basis, and unless somebody's monitoring it, you're going to get in trouble. Tools, just before we go for break, there is in the Teams Admin Center Network Planner, and you can create what we call personas. So in my case, in the Melbourne office, you say, okay, Melbourne office users use all features in Teams, including calls. They make calls from the Teams client. Some locations might say, no, we're going to keep our existing PBX for those people for the moment. So they're using Teams for everything else except that. So you put all what the type of worker is, how many of them there are. In the case of the location, you say, well, how does the Melbourne office connect to the internet? Do they come back to a head office over a WAN to go to the internet, or do they have local access to the internet? You put all that in. If it's WAN, you say, well, how much is allocated, set aside for audio, video, and desktop sharing? You fill all that in, and then you say go, and it'll come back and say, well, based on that information, this is the likely impact that it's going to have to the network. So you can see Seattle there's got 1,000 users. So this is the likely impact. Then there might be some other ones that piggyback, where they might say, hey, you might need to up that bandwidth that you're setting aside for audio, video. So it gives you recommendations there, which is good. There's call analytics. So if a user complains that the performance is poor, so I know this is a bit blurry now, but like Adele's talking to Alan, I can see the devices that she's running. So maybe her headsets or microphones, those types of things, that might tell me whether they're causing some drama. The operating system that she's running the Teams client from, and the network. So she might be on Wi-Fi networks, and that might be what's causing the problem. Likewise, I've got Alan over here, because all they know is they were getting poor quality. For argument's sake, it might be Alan's Wi-Fi network, and Adele's using a wired network. And then you just get this overall summary of a call in the middle. But you can scroll down and get more, so the camera, there's information on the microphone, there's information on the camera as well, and the speakers. If you wanted to, you can go to advanced. Clearly you get more information, and if you've got somebody in your comms team that want more than that, you can give them the debug screen. You can export it, send it to them, and that will set them to sleep. There's hundreds of parameters. Mainly what you want from there is, if it's not one of these key things on the front screen, and you suspect it's a network problem, that'll tell you, was it jitter, was it latency, was it excessive burst over, those types of things. And call quality dashboard is another one. You can get to that from the admin center too, and there's some built-in reports that'll just tell you overall from a business perspective, how's the network performing from Teams. There's also a Power, it's not mentioned in your notes, but Power BI Pro. If you've got Power BI Pro license, there's a connector, and you can connect that to Teams, and so you can create your own reports and dashboards if you wanted to from that too, which is very, very cool. Connectivity to office.com would be probably something that I would suggest that you run. And in fact, if a user rings up and says we've got a problem, or on one of your Teams devices it's poor, you can run that from the location, and this will tell you where's the best front door location from Microsoft. So you can see somebody in Florida has gone here, and it might be fine. Over here on the right, we've got somebody in, looks like Florida again, is jumping over to probably Germany, I think it is. So that'll give you a further breakdown. This is the good one. No errors, no pack. Here's what your latency and your jitter was. It's well below the recommended minimum. You can export it too. And this is the person that's going across to Germany. So it says, hey, you're in Florida and your internet access point is in Germany. And maybe you want to decrease that. It's 483 miles or 7,000 kilometers, and you're certainly blowing the recommended latency and jitter examples. So there's some recommended things. I think they're quite generous. So when they say client to Microsoft, that could be a user from home. So less than 50 milliseconds, one way, round trip, they would just doubled it. From a business perspective, they're just saying it would be ideal if the edge facing router, if you like, had these types of performances to the Microsoft network and back. There is also testconnectivity.com is another one that's pretty good. I can't say I played around too much with this, but in the Microsoft Admin Center, not in the Teams Admin Center, this is here under Health. You can jump into that, and Test Connectivity as well does it, where they say, well, here's your internet performance. There are some other people. This breaks it down to Exchange and SharePoint and Teams, so it's showing you the individual services, but it actually compares you to other people, other customers using Microsoft in the same location as you. So actually, the crimson ain't that great. Green's a better one. So what it might show you is why are we getting poxy connection to the internet? If people in the same locations may are getting better. It might be your network location, your network settings. It could, maybe it's your ISP using a different ISP to them. So that's pretty cool. All right, let's have a break. Let's have a Kit Kat. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. What I will do is I'll pause that recording. Pause. Can I pause? Look, I might leave it running because I'd hate you to miss out on anything. Let's make it back. I'll make it, so it's 25 past. 5:40 p.m. Now that's Melbourne time. Sorry, I can't do the math for all of you. 15 minutes roughly from your time now, maybe just a little bit under 15 minutes. Go and stretch your legs, grab a water, get some blood pumping through your legs. When we come back, we will get into the next two modules. See you soon. Okay, hopefully everyone's back. Let's have a look at module 3. So what we're looking at here is room designs and the different components. So they're the peripherals, intelligent cameras, content cameras, Windows, small form factor computes, all-in-one devices. So it goes through those types of things and what would be more suitable to different types of workspaces. So in purchasing the device, this is where we've got to make sure that, what's the purpose behind the room, the size. As I said, some of the cameras can only zoom in so far. You might need multiple cameras for that, so you've got to be aware of that. And maybe it's future use, because sometimes buying the equipment, you might say, well, at the moment we're just using it, but we might want to expand on that down the track. So you don't want to necessarily lock yourself into a corner. Furniture, the types of furniture can absorb sound. That's not always a bad thing, but placement of furniture, maybe some furniture can't be moved, can have an impact on where you mount things and where you can place things. The materials, rugs can help. Ceiling tiles can help. You can also buy artwork now that baffles the sound, that looks like modern art that you can sit in the corner, but glass isn't going to help. Concrete floors aren't going to help. You'll get very echoey environments there. Light sources coming in that's affecting the screen at the back, making it hard for people to see. Air conditioners that can affect speaker placement. Sometimes people do that. They mount speakers and it's right next to something that's humming, and that can all be. And also, laying out of cables. So the next one probably just takes that a little bit further. Have a look at it. Don't know why my screen's frozen for a second. Sorry, let's go back. Where were we? Yeah, I think that's it. It's probably going to jump back in a second. Yeah, I knew that. There we go. So small rooms, we might be able to quite happily cope with an all-in-one style device there, where one monitor, one camera, speaker, microphone, etc., suits this room very, very well. Then we move into medium-sized rooms where one microphone might not be good enough. So this is where we're starting to look at more of a Windows solution where you can add more peripherals to it. And then we have multi-purpose rooms. So the idea here, there's multiple monitors at the front, but there's also a whiteboard. So the people want to incorporate that in the meeting. Now you can use digital whiteboards. There's digital whiteboards at Surface Hub. There's also this Microsoft whiteboard that you can launch inside a Teams meeting and utilize it, and people can start writing on it. But maybe you got a bunch of designers or engineers, and they're just so used to using the big whiteboard, they want to continue using the whiteboard where people get up and write something on it. So we might start wanting a camera on that. So placement of the camera, tilt, tan, zoom, PTZ, the thing you'll see. So what's the field of vision, field of view? Can we get everybody in with a single camera? Can it zoom in on the person at the back of the room and make them quite clearly visible if we need to? How many microphones do we need? Is one going to be good enough? Where can we place it? Cable management. As I said this morning, you might be working in a heritage listed places where you just can't drill into the wall, and you might have to run conduits everywhere or along the floor. Those types of issues. The wall, what sort of weight can we mount onto it? It's fine if it's a structural wall, but if it's just a partition type wall, how much weight can that thing handle if you want to have two large monitors? The acoustics of the room, so we mentioned the carpets and the concrete and the glass and just general lighting. It might be that it's poor lighting. It also might mean that it's coming in on an angle that's we might need to do something with curtains or something to try to help in that regard. So here we have a multi-purpose room. So breakout tables for various things. There's an overhead projector. Does that need to be incorporated into the meeting as well? They look like they've got some flip charts. And then they've got the executive room. This is the CEO's room at Microsoft, to the best of my knowledge. Got the two monitors at the front there with the cameras mounting for displaying everybody. And I'm not 100% sure, but in the center of those U-shaped lights, you can have those tiles that can be microphones as well as speakers, although it looks like they've got some speakers elsewhere in the room. They could just be downlights. It's a little bit hard to tell from that picture. But I like how, the majority of people can be caught by this camera A little bit tough for the people on the side, but it's there's the purpose of it, the size of the room. It's all going to determine placement of cameras, numbers of microphones. Is there peripherals that we want to include in the meeting as well? So we'll talk about content cameras. I think I've covered all these things we mentioned there. Pan, tilt, zoom, field of view or field of vision. How many microphones? The quality of the microphones, cable management, etc. So room assessment. What's the goal of this room? You might have started the training today with, now that we've more offering this hybrid solution, you might start having, right, we are going to have these little huddle workspaces where an all-in-one device is going to be fine. But once you nominate that location, maybe one of the walls is a window, and so there's really only one wall. Is that going to suit the placement of the, now we've got to put the monitor, and underneath we might put the all-in-one device underneath. What's behind that wall? Is there a noisy environment behind that wall? Is there a microwave behind that wall? Something like that could have an impact on it. So what's the purpose of the room? How many numbers are we expecting in here? And is it going to be a continual, are we using it quite regularly all day, or is it going to be the ad hoc meetings? So I won't go through all these types of stuff, but yeah, I mentioned it before. Is it anything like a physical whiteboard? It has to be included. We'll start looking at content cameras in a second. That can certainly help with that. Larger environments, you might be looking at Crestron type of solutions where you can, from a single touch panel, you can control the lights, project the screens, dim the lights, shut the curtains, all those types of things if you need to. Standard deployment. This is where I'm not saying that you should use the same vendor. I'm not saying you should lock yourself into Windows or an Android solution for that matter. But certainly, if depending on what you've purchased, you might be able to start getting the peripherals and start working with those before the device itself arrives, or vice versa. Now, if it's consistent, you're sticking with a similar vendor all the time. As I said, if you go for Windows, the process out-of-box experience is identical for all vendors. If you go for Android, it's different for each manufacturer. So that might be part of your goals, is we want to have a consistent experience. But yeah, you might find some items take a little bit longer to arrive than others, but you might be able to start configuring certain things before the monitor arrives or before the microphones arrive. You can still start configuring it. It depends on your time frame for getting this. The other thing that I would mention there is you want to start identifying your key stakeholders, and what sort of the time frame are we looking at here from a success point of view. So from an overall perspective here, so plan, let's have a look at the room. Is it suitable? Can we hang things? Do we have to go through building management to check that? I know in our location we can't do anything like that without going through our building management for various reasons, and they can also advise you on the maximum loads that the walls can take, or if you're drilling, are you near power, those types of things. Letting people know that the existing meeting room is going to be offline, unavailable while we are doing the preparation for it and the testing of it. If you're lucky enough to have an audio and video team, mentioned it before, in the past, it sort of gets lumped on IT or the person signing the check. They're not always experts in audio, video, and might end up with something that you've purchased and you regret in the long term. So always keep in mind what could happen. If you've got a Windows solution, you can add more peripherals. If you've bought an all-in-one Android device, certainly you could relocate it and use it elsewhere. But yeah, be aware of that type of stuff. So you might have the people that are specialists in that. They do they write the initial procedures, and then they do the rollouts into all the other locations if you extend it. And then you've got the IT people that need to be involved. They'll be doing the QoS, the firewall, the proxy, the port numbers, all those types of things, the managing of the operating system, and potentially the managing of the devices moving forward. And I would probably suggest, why not create a team channel, and in that channel you put all the documentation, each room, the different types of vendors and devices, step-by-step instructions. Most of them have great manuals on that type of stuff. How you've laid out the cable in particular rooms, and maybe some generic troubleshooting, and also set up instructions, just so if you make the effort and you know down the track you're going to have more of these things. And that's why I say, don't just think well, we've got 2 or 3 meetings rooms. We might get 2 or 3 Teams rooms devices. You might get more. You might start having more collaboration environments. I'm not saying that because I make money out of it. I wish I did, but I really think that that's going to be the way forward as more and more people work from home or in the office. Everybody can't use the meeting room. So you might have more collaboration. So keep those in mind by so going through this effort. And I'd also, as I said, have the contact points for so anybody installing another one, they've got a consistent set of steps to follow through. Perhaps not the best diagram, but what often, make sure that you have something like this, and generally you would keep a digital copy of it on the network. A lot of times there's a printed version, and a lot of businesses hide it, if you like, behind the monitor on the wall, often with the elbow. You can just stick it in there, and anybody walking in there that needs to support it or re-plug everything back into somebody's had a go at unplugging everything, at least they can get their hands on it. But I'd certainly have a copy of it on the network as well. And sometimes you do get people fiddling with cables. Somebody goes in there and they want to plug their laptop into something and they don't know how to do it, and they start unplugging things and cause more drama than it's worth. And training, now we talk a little bit more about this tomorrow in module 8, but just some basic signage for people just on how to start a meeting, maybe how to schedule a meeting. Maybe you want to produce some videos and put it out. You can create barcodes, QR codes that people can scan. That might give them a link to a video they can watch. Goes through a basic setup of it. And you might also want to include things like, is there a meeting etiquette? If you wanted to do that as well, and maybe reference somebody in that building that they can go to if they need support. Maybe there's a subject matter expert. Now, the components that make up Teams Room. Now, this is a Windows solution we're looking at here because it's got the compute with the Android devices, the operating system that is incorporated into the device. So you've got the touch screen, the compute itself. So this is why you might have more USB ports or more audio video connections to the back. The camera. Then we've got an EPOS intelligent speaker and microphone built in, one, a little bit more on that later on, and a single display. That's a pretty basic rollout there, but you can have multiple displays. You can also have those door panels that I was talking about before, so people can walk past and out the front it says there's a meeting in session. When the next meeting is coming up, people can use it to schedule a meeting too. And you might have multiple microphones, but that's a simple setup. So the console, what we're looking at here is Crestron, Flex, HP. That's a Poly one, I think. And the Lenovo Think Smart Hub. So that's the compute and the touch console combined into one. They're the only ones that do it at the moment. And that can make life a little bit easier from cable management. Maybe the ability to move it around becomes a little bit more of an issue. Logitech Tap, very popular. And we've got Yealink there. Now, I know it's a little bit hard to see on these things, but that's, the touch screen will show you the meeting that's, you can click join the next schedule, so they are in order from here. And people can start, dial somebody depending if it's configured for calling, etc. They can all do that from there. So that's a familiar interface for people. Because it's we're continuing with the Microsoft solution, there's the compute or the small form factor, if you like. So now different vendors work with different peripherals. So Poly and Lenovo and HP sort of work together. So Poly equipment can maybe use a Lenovo or HP computes. Dell and Logitech sort of pal up, Logitech and Lenovo, and Logitech can use a Lenovo computes. HP have HP presence devices. Yealink only work with Yealink. They have their own compute. And Intel and Logitech, can work together as well, if you like. So there's different vendors there. So that's where you might say, well, we've already got an arrangement with HP. Let's go down that path and put it as part of our contract if you wanted to. Then we've got the cameras. So you've got Jabra. That's a Yealink, Hudley, Logitech. That's another Poly there. Logitech, Poly again, and Aver Media. So field of vision, tilt, pan, zoom. Some you might want to mount in the ceiling. You want to flip the display. They all are supporting of Teams. They all should be able to do that. Now, content camera, it's a second camera that you can put on a whiteboard or a flip chart if you wanted to, and you can see how, even though somebody walks in front of it, you can see any text that was on the whiteboard. You can actually see what they're drawing there. So it turns an analog whiteboard into a digital whiteboard. Now, other people can't write on it, but it's very handy from that. Also, what it will do is square it up. So even if you have to mount the camera in a particularly different angle, the person might be from the top down, so you'd see my bald patch, but the whiteboard would look straight. So it's quite clever how that works. And tomorrow we'll go through a little bit of the configuring out. There's some different vendors there. So Hudley, Logitech, Ava, and Yealink there, and that's another Logitech Scribe. And then Jabra Panacast 50. Whoops. Jabra Panacast 50, sorry, in the bottom right-hand corner. That's speakers, cameras, 3 cameras with 180-degree vision. And one of those cameras, if you wanted to, can act as a content camera. They are pretty cool. They've just been certified, to the best of my knowledge. If not, they won't be far off. So as you can see, some of these with the arms, you mount it on the top, on the wall or on the top of the whiteboard, so it's pointing down. Others, you can move it around a little bit more. That one you'd probably mount on the wall as well. Audio components. So we've got some microphones in here, or all-in-one style devices. So it's a Poly Studio, all USB. Bose audio bar runs off USB. Crestron. EPOS, that's an intelligent speaker. By that, it has voice recognition. So you can say, hey, Siri. Not Siri. Oh God, it's got a lost from Alexa, not Alexa. Isn't that awful? Cortana, hey Cortana. Yeah, thanks, Jason. I'm always very careful saying it because I've got an Apple Watch, so I have to be very careful when I say she who will not be named. But there's a few other things too. You can actually record your voice. It supports up to 10 at the moment. So if I'm in a meeting room and I'm speaking, instead of seeing meeting room 1, it can detect that that's my digital voice imprint, and it'll have my name and the text underneath it in the transcript, which is very, very cool. So voice recognition commands. So it's also a speaker as well as a microphone. You got a Logitech mic puck there and a Yealink one. But then you can come across to the right hand. There's Sennheiser, Shure, big vendors there. Big stuff by Amp, etc. And they're panels that you can mount on the ceiling that act as microphones as well as speakers. You can have like little switch boxes to run as many microphones around it as you want to. Pretty serious sort of solutions. Small room, this is a classic. Now, we haven't put power and Ethernet connections to the wall, so keep that in mind. So here's pretty much your microphone, speaker and camera. USB connection to the compute. So we're still looking at Windows here. Monitor, HDMI connection to the monitor. You can have an extra USB connection if it's a touch screen enabled monitor. USB to the console, mostly now they're power over Ethernet. So what I did from that regard, this is just from a Logitech Rally Bar, and I'll be honest, it's probably Logitech is the one that I've had the most exposure to. I haven't played around with a lot of the Crestron stuff, to be honest. What you can do here is it's an Ethernet cable into like a power adapter, and then the other adapter you plug into that and it connects into the PC, so they can find one another to pair with each other. And this is probably, a better one in my opinion. You've got USB-C, so if anybody does muck around with it, they know exactly, okay, I've got to use that for that type of device. But yeah, we haven't got power or anything there as well. Moving into a larger type of environment, I'll just present that whole slide here. So we've got the compute with power, everything that we use USB to the console. Consoles will support an HDMI connection if you want to plug your laptop in, at which point it'll disable the camera and the microphone so you don't get the feedback. It's supported, but I've been in meetings where, I've finished my turn now. I've got to pick up my notes on my laptop, unplug it, get out the way. The next person's got to come in and present to the rest of the room. And that sucks. So it's there, but really you should stay seated where you are and just join the meeting with Teams software on your laptop and present from wherever you're sitting. But yeah, it's still there if you need it. We have dual monitors, so they'd be HDMI, USB to one of them if it's a touchscreen if you needed it. But we can also have table extensions, display extensions. So if you want to have multiple speakers, multiple cameras, they can all hook into this display extender, which USB, pretty much everything comes back to the compute. And then the display extender needs Cat6 connection to the table extension where you can have multiple mics there if you wanted to. So it's a bigger solution there. And a content camera, I didn't mention that. Make sure you use good cables and update the firmware. Now, in a Microsoft solution, when the operating system updates, generally the firmware drivers are included. But tomorrow we'll talk about how, if you must, you can upgrade them if you like. But yeah, especially HDMI cables. I know sometimes when you go and buy a TV or something like that, they try to talk you into a high-end HDMI cable, but yeah, certainly older ones, cheaper ones, you're not going to get the same amount of quality, that's for sure. So that is module 3. Let's have a look at the last one for today, which is the resource account. There's a little bit of PowerShell in this one, and I hope everybody's okay with that. You don't stress. Mostly what we do have is say, hey, you can use PowerShell or you can use an alternative. But for those of you who haven't dealt much with PowerShell, it's a command line utility, probably aimed at administrators, as opposed to you have to be a coder like a developer. It's probably it's very much an oversimplification of it, because you can do quite a lot of stuff in it, but traditionally with programming language, you'd have to do looping and iteration. You let I be equal to this and next I and all that stuff. So you can get away with PowerShell and use it like pipe characters and stuff. We're mainly looking at, this course was put together by Microsoft for companies that might go out and do rollouts of Teams rooms. So they don't want to sit there and manually do, 40 of them or 20 of them. They just want to script it and run it. So it's still very handy for everybody. But we give you options. There's a couple of things that I'll cover before we finish today that are only available in PowerShell, but most of it we can do it in the graphical user interface as well. So the resource account, what is it? How do we create it? There's various different ways of doing it with the GUI or with PowerShell. And then once it's created, what other options, what other settings can we apply to it? So effectively the resource account gets the mailbox. So when you book a Teams room, it's calendar that's blocked out. All right. So it's basically got an Exchange mailbox. Now that doesn't mean you have to give it a user license. Okay, so you can create a resource account in Teams or in the admin center or an Exchange admin center for that matter. But once you've created the resource account, things to consider: you don't want this to be an account that needs multi-factor authentication, or its password has to change every 90 days. Because what happens with, especially the Teams Windows devices, every night at 2, they prepare themselves, they go off looking for updates to Teams software and the Windows software. They'll pull that down and then they'll do a restart. Also, there could be some settings that it's waiting to apply that you've rolled out to it. So once that happens, it relogs on with a resource account. You don't want the password to expire, or you don't want it sitting there waiting for multi-factor authentication. So be aware of that. So once you've created the resource account, this is the thing you assign the license to as well. And we can go back into it. So you can use the admin center, PowerShell, or as your Active Directory users computers, or Active Directory user computers on premises, and then allow Active Directory sync to replicate it up to the cloud. I'm not recommending that, but there are just various ways you can do that, mainly for people that might still be hybrid with Skype for Business on-prem. But it is a unique, every Teams room device has to have a unique account. However, you log on to the console with that account, but you can have one of those panels on the room outside, and that uses the same account. That just displays to everybody walking past that the room's in use, or when it's next in use, and schedule a meeting from that panel as well. That's the one we also want to protect. So when we're talking about conditional access tomorrow, this is the account that we want to lock down as well. And naming standards. So there's a bit of a flow diagram here. So what room are we setting this up for? Does the resource account already exist? If not, create it. Then we want to go through and configure some of these post creation options, like password doesn't expire. We'll also look at calendar options we can do. If it needs to interact with Skype for Business, well, there's certificates and a few other things involved for that too, but we're mainly focusing on Teams on its own. So there's the admin center, just a little walkthrough. So you go to resources, rooms and equipment, and you click add, and you fill in the information in here. Now, the phone number, you can type a phone number in here, but it doesn't assign that phone number to the device. You have to do that via the Teams admin center. So it's purely informational at that point in time. Doesn't mean you wouldn't use it, but this is basically what will display in the global address list, I suppose. And phone numbers are only available if it's voice enabled. So that's another license. So if you want to go into a Teams room and dial somebody's landline or their mobile phone and do an audio conference with them, yeah, it needs the phone line. Or somebody wants to dial into the room and talk to everybody in the room, you need that as well. But you allocate the phone number through Teams Admin Center. So there's the email address, which will probably, you've got a little bit of control over that. You probably do want to put something like MTR as a prefix there, because we can start doing with these resource account and computers. More on that tomorrow. We can group them together. Everything starts with MTR or something similar, so you can do dynamic device groups. Once we've created that, you can go edit booking options. So you can have I'm just working from bottom to top. Auto accept meetings is on by default. It just simply means if it's available and I book it, it's accepted. Okay. If you turn that off, you have to nominate some people that will get the invitation. So they'll get the invitation as well as the room, and it's up to that person to decide whether to allow it or not. So maybe you've got a meeting room that's, you can book, but it's sort of set aside for another purpose, and it might be ideal for a third party to say yes or no before the meeting is accepted. Automatic decline meetings outside of the limits below. What can happen with this is it's 6 months there. So somebody might do a recurring meeting. Yeah, we'll have every Wednesday night, we'll have a meeting forever. So the boss puts that in. What will happen, they'll only accept it for the first 6 months. After 6 months, they're going to have to go and do it again. Now you can change these parameters, but that's the defaults there. And you can only book the room a maximum of 24 hours. You could decrease that if you wanted to. And will you allow people to schedule outside of working hours? So you can configure working hours in a couple of different areas call operators and a few other areas you can do that. How to create, you'll see the user in here. So there's the small conference room. And it's here that you might turn off. Password has to automatically change the next time the person logs on. So you can put in a complex password in here, never for it to change, exclude it from multi-factor authentication, any other policies like that, conditional access policy. And this is also where you can go and assign the license and its location. Locations and users don't affect where the data sits, but it's whether a service is on offer. So some parts of the world don't allow video chat. So if you don't set that properly for a user, Microsoft may offer a feature that they're not really supposed to be using in that location. But from a Teams room, just match the location of where the country of where it is. But this is where you apply the license. Now this is either basic, Teams room basic, or Teams room pro, and maybe a calling plan if you want to do a calling plan for inbound and outbound calls. So they are the old licenses. So it's basic or pro. Talk a bit more about that tomorrow. If you want to create the user via PowerShell rather than using that method. So this is just an alternative. So if you're doing lots of them, you might say, I'm going to script this. So you need these modules. You need Azure Active Directory module because you're creating an Azure AD account, the resource account. You need Exchange module because it looks after the mailbox, and that's how you do the auto accept meetings and the outside of office hours booking the meetings configuration in there. And you have to have the Teams commands installed as well. And that's primarily for if you wanted to set it up for calling. Right, so if you want to allocate, that's what I said, it's optional. It's only if you're going to do the voice activation in that scenario. Cool. There, so connect as your ID. Now you need the SKU, the subscription SKU. When you create a tenancy with Microsoft, they give you a unique ID. So you need to discover that. You're going to copy that top one to the clipboard. So that's 030. And then, now, if you're going to do like 50 of them or 20 of them, this is where you can declare variables. Now, if you're not that au fait with PowerShell, you would have to go through that earlier process 20 times. And what you might decide to do is, what I'll do is I'll test this, I'll get it working once, and then instead of me finding in the code and changing this, I'll just, this isn't creating anything, it's just setting up, hey, I want the phrase $account UPN equal to, at this time it runs, to this information. And then all you need to do is substitute that with the next team's room and run the code again. So you don't have to find every time it's referenced in the code, you just declare it the current value one up the top. So here they've assigned the naming convention. There's an aliases you can have for mailboxes, the password for this resource account, the license. This is where you have to paste that code that the previous screen gave us, its location and a display name. And you normally give that a bit more of a description there for people about it than just something like that. And now I've got the account. I connect to Exchange Online as well. Create a mailbox for that. And also along here, it's saying things like, okay, when people are searching for the mailbox, are we going to allow automatic acceptance, booking the room, if you like? So there's the order, set the calendar to auto accept meetings. You could do things like, delete the subject, remove private. When somebody creates a meeting and they select this as a private meeting, then things like the subject aren't visible. However, on the resource account, you could always set it to that, because maybe it's in the executive's office and you don't want somebody to be sitting in and the boss has said, go and sit over there until I get a chance. And they're looking at the little Teams room console there, and it's got all the upcoming meetings with a description on it. All right, but if people forget to tick private, attendees can see, and if you've got one of those panels, people can walk past and see redundancy meeting, that type of stuff. So this would be an example. We say this resource account for this particular Teams room device, I always want it to be private. There's a couple of other things that you can do. Process external meeting messages true. What that does is it allows interaction with third-party things like Zoom and WebEx. So somebody can host a Zoom meeting or a WebEx meeting, but you could still use the Teams room device to join in on it. There's a couple of other ones. So creating a single user, if you didn't want to use the variables, you say, hey, this one has created the variable $account UPM, and the password, I don't want the password to expire. Location and assigning the license. A lot of work, isn't it? But, if you streamline it, once you've got it, you can actually create a spreadsheet. I'll show you coming up in a second. And that's the final one, assigning the license. Notice it's used the $AD license. That's the one that's temporarily holding that SKU. Or you could do something like this. Open up Excel. Don't get fancy. Don't put blank columns and blank rows. You just put the first row contains the property name and underneath contains the values. So what we do now is you save it as a CSV file, which Excel can do. And down here we're saying, let the path be this location. So it's looking for a file called Teams Room CSV, which is the above file. We've got it in a temporary location. We're going to import it. We're just saying we're importing every row, and it knows to ignore the top row. That's the properties. So it's the 4 underneath. And then we're saying for each row in that above file, can you please do the following? This is where the variables might come into play. That's saying, okay, the account user principal name, for the first time you run this, well, you can get the value for that variable from this file, which we've called, this has been declared up here, account UPN. So I have to say, if you're looking at this and you fancy using it, that is an error. that has to be that. That's what it's doing. It's basically saying, hey, you can get, so the next one's okay, mailbox name, they're all matching the column headings, but that's an error in this screen. So a little bit of work the first time you set it up, but this is basically what it's doing the next time it's running. It's saying, well, we've done that one. Now we look at row 3. We just change that variable to whatever we have in column A for variable for row 3. Off it goes again. So it seems like a lot of work, but yeah, again, a lot of this has been designed for companies that go out and do mad rollouts for lots of businesses, and they want to take full advantage of these types of things. Other things you might want to do post creation. So we're in the Exchange Admin Center. You might find a lot of this stuff starting to drift away in Exchange. So it might be as much to change in here anymore. They'll probably send you back to the Admin Center or the Teams Admin Center. But yeah, you can go into here, and that's just confirmation that you'll see, oh yeah, because it's got a mailbox. So even though you might have created it with PowerShell, or you've created it in the User Admin Center, it'll still appear in here because of the mailbox, and you can edit some things in here. Now there's features called mail tips. So mail tips with PowerShell, it's exchange commands. It just means when people add the team room as an attendee of the meeting, because they want to book that, it'll pop up and it'll display whatever tip that you've created. So this is sort of just saying, hey, this room's enabled for Teams. You might also want to say it can comfortably handle 25 people. So if they're attending on a meeting and putting more people than that in it, nice little visual clue to them as to that. You can also send back a reply. So if somebody books a meeting and it's accepted, either manually or automatically, they get this return email message. You can snazz it up. It's HTML, so you can have links to a video that you've created or is just on the internet, and people can run through it and watch it. So it's completely tailored. So maybe in a new environment, it says, hey, why don't you watch this short video before you run into that meeting because somebody's got it after you. It'd be better that you run through this before you go in and start the meeting. You can do all sorts of stuff. Yeah, I'm sure marketing's probably got something like that they might be able to help you with. Other optional settings. Process external meeting messages. In this case, it's set to false. That will break if you want to use WebEx or Zoom or BlueJeans. So some people are using that, but you want to integrate it with Teams, it's going to fail in that case. So you would want to set that to true if you want it to coexist with third-party stuff. Delete subject and delete comments. I wouldn't delete comments again if you're integrating it with a third-party solution, because the comments often have stuff like that in the invitation to people. But maybe the subject, in this case, on certain devices, you might want to set it to true. It's a little bit like the purpose of the meeting. I probably wouldn't bother about that. It's not really a security thing, to be quite honest. Remove old calendar meetings and remove messages. Sometimes people send, put the Teams room in a distribution list and emails getting sent to it. Well, nobody opens up the mailbox and looks at those things. It doesn't really have it's not that type of a mailbox. It's really just for the calendar appointments. So you can ask for old meetings to just automatically be deleted, and anything other than meeting calendar events, you could just delete it. And I should know off the top of my head, there's a default. I think it's 60 days. I could have that wrong. It just automatically cleans them out there. I'll think about that. Optional display name, having something like the room capacity on the size and its location. If you are hosting meetings with people in other organizations, calling things like meeting room 1, every business might have meeting room 1. Now, I don't know, you might call your rooms Kosciuszko or something like that. It's sort of popular at mountain ranges or rivers. But if you are going to just do plain old conference room 1, conference room 2, there are settings I'll show you tomorrow with third-party invites that you can provide extra information, so there's no confusion that it's not their meeting room 1, it's our meeting room 1 that's talking from that regard. So there's the display name, and maybe providing extra information in there ain't a bad idea, such as room capacities and stuff along those lines. So if you can use the GUI, or you can use PowerShell if you want to. Now, room lists, and there's also places. What what that allows you to do, if I'm in Teams, so Rooms List only works in Teams. So if I'm in my Outlook calendar and I schedule a meeting in Outlook, even though I click the purple Teams button because I want it to be a Teams invite, you don't see it in Outlook, but you'd see it in the calendar in Teams.